The fall of the Berlin Wall. The fall of the Berlin Wall, a pivotal moment in history, marked the symbolic end of the Cold War and the beginning of a new era in Europe. This historic event occurred on November 9, 1989, when the German Democratic Republic, also known as East Germany, opened its borders to the West, leading to the demolition of the Berlin Wall, which had divided the city for almost 30 years. The wall's fall was not just a physical destruction of concrete and barbed wire, but the collapse of a divided ideology, reflecting the end of communist rule in Eastern Europe and the triumph of democratic values. The Berlin Wall had been erected in 1961 during the height of the Cold War, a period of intense political and military tension between the Western Bloc, led by the United States, and the Eastern Bloc, led by the Soviet Union. The wall was a manifestation of the division between East and West, both ideologically and physically. The GDR, a communist state, built the wall to prevent its citizens from escaping to West Berlin, which was part of West Germany and a symbol of democratic freedom and prosperity. The wall became a powerful symbol of the oppression and separation between the communist East and the capitalist West. Throughout the 1980s, the situation in East Germany and Eastern Europe began to shift dramatically. The Soviet Union, under the leadership of Mikhail Gorbachev, adopted a more reformist approach with policies like glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring, which aimed to bring about political and economic reforms. These policies not only loosened the Soviet grip on Eastern Europe, but also emboldened people in Eastern Bloc countries to demand more freedoms. In East Germany, there was increasing dissatisfaction with the government and the lack of political freedoms. Many citizens began to flee the country through Hungary, which had opened its borders to Austria, creating a loophole for East Germans to escape to the West. The pressure for change grew, and by the late 1980s, mass protests were breaking out in East Germany. Citizens were calling for reforms, including greater political freedoms and an end to the oppressive regime. The East German government, facing mounting pressure, began to weaken. The momentum for change reached a boiling point in the fall of 1989, when, on November 9th, the government made a confusing announcement regarding travel restrictions. The announcement stated that East Germans would be allowed to travel to the West, but the specifics were unclear. In the confusion, citizens interpreted the announcement as meaning that the Berlin Wall would be opened immediately. People, eager to reunite with their families and experience the freedoms of the West, flooded the border crossings. Border guards, overwhelmed and unsure of what to do, opened the gates, allowing thousands of East Germans to cross into West Berlin. The scenes that followed were nothing short of historic. East and West Germans embraced each other, celebrating in the streets, with some even climbing the wall itself and chipping away at the concrete with hammers and chisels. The fall of the Berlin Wall had immediate and profound consequences. It symbolized the collapse of communist regimes in Eastern Europe and the end of the Soviet Union's influence in the region. In the months that followed, countries like Poland, Hungary, and Czechoslovakia saw peaceful revolutions that overthrew their communist governments. The opening of the Berlin Wall paved the way for the reunification of Germany, which officially occurred on October 3, 1990, less than a year after the wall's fall. The end of the Berlin Wall was a triumph for human rights and freedom. It represented the end of a divided Europe and the beginning of a new chapter of unity and cooperation. The reunification of Germany, while a source of celebration, also posed challenges. The integration of East and West Germany was a difficult and sometimes painful process, as there were significant economic, political, and social differences between the two regions. The East, under communist rule for nearly half a century, had lagged behind the West in terms of development and prosperity. However, the fall of the Berlin Wall remains a symbol of hope and the power of peaceful revolution. It demonstrated the will of ordinary people to stand up against oppression and to demand freedom. It also highlighted the importance of diplomacy and the role of leaders like Mikhail Gorbachev, whose willingness to embrace reform and allow change in Eastern Europe contributed to the peaceful end of the Cold War. The collapse of the Berlin Wall marked the triumph of democracy over authoritarianism and set the stage for a new era in Europe, one marked by greater unity and cooperation, symbolizing the desire for freedom that transcended borders. The discovery of fire. The discovery of fire is one of humanity's most significant achievements, marking a turning point in the development of human civilization. Although the exact moment of fire's discovery remains lost to history, the mastery of fire by early humans profoundly influenced the trajectory of human evolution, culture, and survival. Fire provided warmth, protection, the ability to cook food, and the means to forge tools. Its discovery, which likely occurred hundreds of thousands of years ago, set the foundation for the advancements that would shape humanity's future. The ability to control fire is believed to have emerged during the early Pleistocene era, around 1 to 1.5 million years ago, though evidence of its use is difficult to pinpoint. Fire may have been discovered accidentally, perhaps through the natural occurrence of lightning strikes or volcanic activity. Early hominins, such as Homo habilis and later Homo erectus, would have observed fire's effects and learned to use it to their advantage. Over time, humans developed techniques to create fire, transitioning from relying on natural occurrences to actively controlling and producing it. The first evidence of controlled fire use comes from archaeological sites, with some of the earliest known evidence found in the Wonderwork Cave in South Africa. Excavations at this site suggest that Homo erectus, a precursor to modern humans, was using fire around 1 million years ago. The presence of burnt bones and ash indicates that these early humans used fire for cooking and possibly to keep predators at bay. This discovery is significant because it provides insight into how early humans began to harness nature's elements to survive and thrive. Before the discovery of fire, humans likely relied on raw food, which required considerable energy to chew and digest. The ability to cook food with fire brought about a monumental shift in human diet. Cooking made food more digestible, allowing early humans to obtain more calories from the same amount of food. This change would have been crucial for the development of larger brains, as cooked food provided more nutrients and energy, which in turn may have supported the growth of the human brain, a process known as the cooking hypothesis. This hypothesis suggests that the energy saved by cooking food allowed early humans to allocate more resources to brain development, a factor that played a role in the evolution of modern Homo sapiens. The control of fire also played an important role in shaping early social structures. Fire likely became a focal point for early human communities, providing a source of warmth and light during cold nights. It would have been a gathering place for socializing, storytelling, and communal activities. The presence of fire may have encouraged cooperation and social bonding, allowing early humans to share resources and work together for survival. Over time, fire became central to ritualistic practices and spiritual beliefs, with many ancient cultures associating fire with life, transformation, and even the divine. In addition to its practical uses, fire played an essential role in the development of technology. Early humans used fire to harden tools, such as spears, and to make pottery, which allowed for the storage and cooking of food. Fire was also central to the production of metals. The discovery of how to smelt metals like copper and later iron had a profound impact on the advancement of human societies, enabling the creation of more efficient tools, weapons, and infrastructure. The mastery of fire allowed for the development of complex societies and the building of civilizations. The ability to produce fire independently of natural sources also marked a significant advancement in human survival skills. Early humans learned to create fire using various techniques, such as striking flint against rock to create sparks or rubbing sticks together to generate heat. These methods, though primitive, were essential for survival in harsh environments. Fire could be used to cook food, make warmth in cold climates, and ward off dangerous animals, which made it an indispensable tool for survival in prehistoric times. As humans began to migrate out of Africa and into new environments, the ability to control fire became even more critical. It allowed humans to adapt to a variety of climates, from freezing tundras to tropical forests. Fire also played a crucial role in the domestication of plants and animals, as it could be used to clear land for farming and hunting. The discovery of fire didn't just impact early humans, it has had lasting effects on human society throughout history. From the development of agriculture to the rise of cities and industries, fire has been at the heart of human progress. The Industrial Revolution, for example, was powered by the harnessing of fire through steam engines and later electricity. Today, fire continues to be integral to modern technology, from electricity generation to space exploration, as we continue to find new ways to control and harness its power. In conclusion, the discovery and control of fire was a defining moment in human history. It allowed early humans to survive, evolve, and shape the world as we know it. Fire not only provided immediate practical benefits, such as cooking and warmth, but also laid the foundation for the development of tools, social structures, and technologies that would transform human civilization. Its discovery is a testament to the ingenuity of early humans and their ability to adapt to their environment, setting the stage for the incredible achievements that would follow. Fire remains, to this day, a symbol of human innovation and a reminder of our deep connection to the forces of nature. The invention of the wheel. The invention of the wheel stands as one of the most groundbreaking innovations in human history. Its creation marked a pivotal moment in the development of technology and society, influencing everything from transportation to industry and trade. While the wheel itself is a simple object in form, its impact on human civilization is immeasurable, shaping the course of human progress for thousands of years. The origins of the wheel date back to around 3500 BCE in Mesopotamia, one of the world's earliest cradles of civilization. However, the earliest wheels were not the familiar forms we recognize today, but rather solid discs used for pottery. These potter's wheels, which were invented by the Sumerians, were initially designed to shape clay and speed up the process of making pottery. The Sumerians, who lived in what is now modern-day Iraq, discovered that rotating a flat piece of clay on a spinning surface allowed them to create more uniform and refined pottery than by shaping it by hand. The potter's wheel was a revolutionary tool in itself, streamlining a process that had previously been tedious and time-consuming. The next significant step in the evolution of the wheel occurred around 3000 BCE, when the wheel was adapted for use in transportation. The Sumerians, who had already demonstrated their ingenuity with pottery, began to apply the wheel to carts and chariots. This transformation marked the beginning of a new era in mobility. Early wheels for transportation were made from a solid piece of wood, often a single log, and were used for carts that could carry goods or people over longer distances. These carts were drawn by oxen or horses, which significantly improved trade and communication between cities and regions. The use of wheels in transportation became essential to the development of ancient economies and helped to establish the foundation for trade networks that spanned large areas. The invention of the wheel also had a profound effect on warfare. Chariots, which were vehicles with wheels, became an important military innovation in the ancient world. Chariots were used in battle for rapid movement, allowing soldiers to strike quickly and retreat with ease. The chariot was especially important in civilizations such as ancient Egypt, Mesopotamia, and China, where it was used both as a weapon of war and a symbol of power and status. The speed and mobility afforded by the wheel played a significant role in shaping ancient armies and their strategies. As time went on, the wheel continued to evolve. Early wheels were often made of solid wood, but over the centuries, new techniques allowed for the development of spoked wheels. The spoked wheel, which first appeared around 2000 BCE, was lighter and more durable than the solid wooden wheels, which made them even more efficient for use in transportation and warfare. This innovation was particularly important for chariots and carts, as it allowed for faster movement and less wear on the vehicle. The invention of the wheel also had a transformative effect on agriculture. The wheel was used to create watermills, which helped to grind grain more efficiently and increase food production. Watermills, powered by flowing water, allowed civilizations to produce large quantities of flour with minimal labor. This increased agricultural output, which in turn supported the growth of cities and populations. The wheel's role in agriculture extended beyond watermills to the use of wheeled plows, which made it easier to till soil and increase crop yields. The wheel's influence on technology and industry only grew over time. In ancient Rome, the development of the wheel was incorporated into the construction of roads and other infrastructure. Roman engineers constructed an extensive network of roads that connected their empire, facilitating the movement of armies, goods, and information. The durability and efficiency of Roman roads were largely due to the use of the wheel in the construction of wheeled vehicles that could travel great distances over these well-maintained roads. In the modern era, the wheel became a key component in the Industrial Revolution. The advent of the steam engine, which relied on wheels to convert steam power into mechanical work, revolutionized transportation and manufacturing. Trains, cars, and later airplanes all depended on wheels to function. The wheel was instrumental in the development of mass production, allowing for the creation of machines that could produce goods at a scale previously unimaginable. The advent of the wheel also sparked further technological innovation, from the development of gears and pulleys to the intricate systems that power modern machines. In many ways, the wheel was the first step toward the mechanization of labor and the creation of modern technology. The wheel is not only a tool of physical transportation, but also a symbol of human ingenuity and progress. In conclusion, the invention of the wheel stands as one of the most important milestones in the history of civilization. From its humble beginnings as a potter's tool to its central role in transportation, industry, and warfare, the wheel has had an enduring influence on human progress. Its development sparked technological advancements that continue to shape our world today. The wheel is a testament to humanity's ability to innovate and adapt, transforming a simple object into a cornerstone of human development that has shaped the course of history for millennia. The signing of the Magna Carta. The signing of the Magna Carta in 1215 is one of the most significant events in world history, shaping the development of democracy and the rule of law. Often referred to as the Great Charter, the Magna Carta laid the foundation for modern concepts of justice, individual rights, and limited government. It was the result of growing tensions between King John of England and his barons, and its signing marked a pivotal moment in the long struggle for freedom and constitutional governance. By the early 13th century, King John, who ruled England from 1999 to 1216, had earned a reputation for being a ruthless and ineffective ruler. His reign was marked by constant military failures, especially in France, and excessive taxation that burdened the nobility and the common people. John's failure to secure the territories of Normandy and other French lands, which had been lost under his predecessor, King Richard the Lionheart, alienated many of his loyal subjects, particularly the barons. The king's heavy taxation and arbitrary justice created widespread dissatisfaction and resentment. In addition to his failures in foreign affairs and the burden of taxation, King John also clashed with the Church. In 1207, he became involved in a dispute with Pope Innocent III over the appointment of the Archbishop of Canterbury. John refused to accept the Pope's choice, leading to his excommunication and England being placed under an interdict. The king's actions further weakened his authority and alienated a significant portion of the population, both in the church and the nobility. By 1215, the barons had reached a breaking point. They were frustrated by the king's tyranny and the erosion of their rights and privileges. In response, a group of rebel barons began to organize and demand a redress of grievances. Their demands included the protection of traditional rights and liberties, as well as limits on the king's power to raise taxes and make arbitrary decisions. The barons believed that the king had violated the ancient rights of English subjects and sought to restore these rights through a written agreement. In June 1215, after a series of failed negotiations, the rebel barons forced King John to meet with them at Runnymede, a meadow near the River Thames, to discuss their grievances. The barons presented the king with a document that would later become the Magna Carta. At first, King John was reluctant to sign, but under immense pressure and with the threat of armed rebellion looming, he agreed to affix his seal to the document on June 15, 1215. The Magna Carta, although originally intended as a peace treaty between the king and his rebellious barons, quickly became a symbol of broader principles of justice and liberty. The document contained 63 clauses, addressing a wide range of issues, including taxation, justice, and the rights of the Church. Perhaps the most famous clause, Clause 39, declared that no free man shall be seized, imprisoned, disseized, outlawed, exiled, or destroyed, except by the lawful judgment of his equals or by the law of the land. This clause became a cornerstone of English common law and laid the groundwork for the concept of due process, which would later influence legal systems around the world. The Magna Carta also established important protections for the Church, affirming its independence from the king and ensuring that the clergy would not be subject to unjust treatment. It addressed the issue of taxation, limiting the king's ability to raise funds without the consent of his barons, and it demanded reforms to the judicial system, including the regulation of courts and the treatment of prisoners. The document sought to reduce the power of the king and ensure that he ruled within the framework of established laws and customs. While the Magna Carta was not immediately successful in achieving all of the barons' demands, its signing marked the beginning of a long process of constitutional development in England. King John's reign continued to be marked by instability, and after his death in 1216, his son, Henry III, ascended to the throne. During Henry's reign, the Magna Carta was reissued and became a central part of English law, with subsequent revisions solidifying its place in the legal tradition. The Magna Carta's influence extended far beyond England. Its principles of limited government, due process, and the protection of individual rights were later adopted in other parts of the world. The Magna Carta inspired the development of the English Parliament, which gradually gained more power and played a central role in the governance of England. It also served as a model for later constitutional documents, such as the Petition of Right, 1628, the Habeas Corpus Act, 1679, and the Bill of Rights, 1689. In the United States, the Magna Carta's legacy can be seen in the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. The framers of the Constitution were deeply influenced by the ideas contained in the Magna Carta, particularly the concept that rulers should be held accountable to the law, and that individual rights must be protected from arbitrary government action. The principles of due process and the protection of liberties, as outlined in the Magna Carta, became integral to American legal and political thought. In conclusion, the signing of the Magna Carta was a watershed moment in the history of governance and the rule of law. While it was initially a pragmatic response to a political crisis, the Magna Carta evolved into a symbol of the struggle for freedom, justice, and the limitation of governmental power. Its principles continue to resonate today, serving as a foundation for modern democratic systems and human rights. The Magna Carta is a testament to the enduring importance of the rule of law and the belief that no one, not even a king, is above the law. The Black Death sweeps across Europe. The Black Death, one of the deadliest pandemics in human history, swept across Europe in the mid-14th century, leaving a profound mark on society, economy, and culture. It is believed that the disease arrived in Europe in 1347, and within just a few years, it claimed the lives of an estimated 25 to 30 million people, roughly one-third of Europe's population. The impact of the Black Death reshaped the course of European history, altering the social and economic fabric of the continent and contributing to significant changes in religious, political, and cultural life. The Black Death is now understood to have been caused by the bacterium Yersinia pestis, which is transmitted through fleas that lived on rats. The disease is thought to have originated in Central Asia and spread along trade routes, both overland and via the Silk Road, reaching Europe through the bustling port cities of the Mediterranean. The first reported cases of the plague in Europe occurred in Sicily in 1347, when a fleet of Genoese trading ships arrived in the port of Messina, carrying both goods and infected rats. From there, the plague spread rapidly through Italy, France, Spain, and other parts of Europe. The symptoms of the Black Death were horrific. Infected individuals would often develop fever, chills, and swollen, painful lymph nodes, known as buboes, which is where the disease got its name. These buboes would often appear in the groin, armpit, or neck. As the disease progressed, it could lead to septicemia, where the bacteria spread through the bloodstream, or it could cause pneumonic plague, which infected the lungs and made the disease airborne, allowing it to spread even more quickly. In many cases, death occurred within days of the appearance of symptoms. The speed with which the Black Death spread across Europe was astonishing. In some regions, entire villages were wiped out in a matter of days. The disease moved from southern Europe into the heart of the continent, reaching France, Spain, and England by 1348. The plague also ravaged the city of Florence, which lost as much as 60% of its population. As it continued its deadly march, the Black Death devastated populations in cities, towns, and rural areas alike, contributing to mass depopulation and social disintegration. The death toll of the Black Death had profound consequences. The most immediate effect was the collapse of local economies. With such a large portion of the population dead, labor became scarce and agricultural production suffered. Fields went untended and food supplies dwindled, leading to famine in some areas. The shortage of workers caused wages to rise, and the surviving population found themselves in higher demand for work. This shift led to some improvements in the conditions for peasants and workers, as their labor became more valuable. However, this economic change also led to social upheaval, as many feudal lords and landowners were forced to adjust to new economic realities. The impact of the Black Death was not only economic, but also social and religious. The massive death toll caused people to question their faith, leading to a breakdown in the authority of the church. With so many clergy members dying, there was a shortage of priests to perform religious rites, leaving many people feeling spiritually abandoned. The church's inability to protect or offer answers to the devastation led to a decline in its influence, although it remained an important institution in Europe. Many people sought answers through alternative means, leading to a rise in mysticism, witchcraft, and other forms of religious and spiritual exploration. In some cases, the Black Death also prompted a search for scapegoats. One of the most tragic outcomes of the pandemic was the persecution of Jewish communities in Europe. Anti-Semitic sentiments had long existed, but the fear and confusion surrounding the plague exacerbated these prejudices. Jews were often accused of poisoning wells or practicing dark magic, leading to violent attacks, expulsions, and mass killings of Jewish populations in several European cities. This created a lasting legacy of distrust and hatred toward Jews in parts of Europe. The Black Death also left a significant cultural impact. The trauma and devastation of the plague inspired a wave of art and literature focused on death, suffering, and the fragility of life. In literature, works like the Decameron by Giovanni Boccaccio, written in the wake of the plague, depicted the social chaos and human suffering caused by the disease. Artists also turned to themes of mortality with the Danse Macabre, a representation of death leading people of all social classes to their graves, becoming a popular motif in visual art. Despite the staggering loss of life, Europe gradually began to recover from the Black Death. Over time, the population started to grow again, although it would take several generations for the population to reach pre-plague levels. The shortage of labor, however, led to the decline of the feudal system and the rise of a more market-oriented economy. The experience of the Black Death also laid the groundwork for future social changes, such as the rise of the merchant class, the eventual decline of serfdom, and the spread of Renaissance humanism, which emphasized individualism and a renewed interest in classical learning. In conclusion, the Black Death was a catastrophic event that altered the course of European history. It decimated the population, weakened the power of the Church, and brought about significant economic and social changes. The trauma it caused prompted shifts in art, literature, and religion, influencing the cultural landscape of the time. While it took many years for Europe to fully recover, the Black Death played a key role in shaping the modern world by accelerating social, political, and economic transformations that would continue to evolve throughout the coming centuries. The American Declaration of Independence. The American Declaration of Independence, adopted on July 4, 1776, stands as one of the most important documents in the history of the United States and a defining moment in the history of democracy. It marked the official separation of the 13 colonies from Great Britain and laid the foundation for the formation of a new nation, the United States of America. The Declaration not only proclaimed the colonies' desire for independence, but also articulated the philosophical principles upon which the new nation would be based. Its ideas of liberty, equality, and self-governance would resonate throughout history, inspiring movements for freedom and justice around the world. The context leading up to the Declaration was one of increasing tension and unrest between the American colonies and the British government. For years, the colonies had endured a series of British policies that they found unfair and oppressive, such as the imposition of taxes without representation in Parliament, the quartering of British soldiers in colonists' homes, and restrictions on trade and self-governance. The colonists' frustration grew, culminating in events such as the Boston Massacre in 1770 and the Boston Tea Party in 1773, which were seen as direct challenges to British authority. By 1775, tensions had escalated into open conflict. The battles of Lexington and Concord in April 1775 marked the beginning of the American Revolutionary War. As the war progressed, the call for independence gained momentum among the colonists. Many believed that the only way to ensure their rights and freedom was to break away from British rule and form an independent nation. The Continental Congress, a group of representatives from the colonies, had been convening since 1774 to address colonial grievances. In June 1776, the Congress appointed a committee to draft a formal Declaration of Independence. The committee was composed of 5 men: Thomas Jefferson, John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, Roger Sherman, and Robert R. Livingston. Jefferson, a young Virginian, was tasked with writing the first draft of the Declaration, a job that would cement his place in history. Jefferson's draft of the Declaration was influenced by Enlightenment ideas, particularly those of philosophers such as John Locke, who advocated for the natural rights of individuals to life, liberty, and property. Jefferson's writing emphasized that all men are created equal and that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. These rights, he argued, include life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The Declaration asserted that governments are instituted among people to secure these rights, and that any government that fails to do so loses its legitimacy. Most importantly, the Declaration stated that when a government becomes tyrannical, it is the right of the people to alter or abolish it, and to establish a new government that would better serve their needs. The Declaration's preamble, which outlines these philosophical principles, is one of its most famous and enduring sections. It begins with the now iconic words, "We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness." This bold statement laid the groundwork for future movements advocating for civil rights, equality, and democratic governance, both within the United States and abroad. Following the preamble, the Declaration outlines a list of grievances against King George III, the British monarch, accusing him of violating the rights of the colonists. These grievances cover a wide range of issues, including the king's refusal to allow the colonies to govern themselves, his imposition of unjust taxes, and his use of military force to suppress colonial resistance. The list of grievances was a powerful argument for why the colonies had no choice but to declare independence. Jefferson and the other members of the Continental Congress believed that the king's actions had left them with no other option but to sever ties with Britain and establish a new government. The Declaration ends with a formal declaration of independence, stating that the colonies are free and independent states and absolved of all allegiance to the British Crown. It concludes with the signers pledging their lives, fortunes, and sacred honor to the cause of independence. In total, 56 delegates from the 13 colonies signed the Declaration, including notable figures such as John Adams, Benjamin Franklin, and Samuel Adams. Each of these men risked their lives by signing, as they knew that it could be considered an act of treason by the British government. The adoption of the Declaration of Independence was a bold and transformative moment. It was not merely a declaration of rebellion, it was a statement of universal principles about human rights and the proper role of government. By proclaiming their independence from Britain, the colonists not only sought to create a new nation, but they also sought to establish a new form of government, one based on the consent of the governed and the protection of individual liberties. The Declaration articulated a vision of a nation where all men could be free to live, work, and pursue their happiness without interference from a distant and tyrannical ruler. The Declaration's influence has endured for centuries. It has been a guiding document for the development of American democracy and has shaped the nation's legal and political system. The principles articulated in the Declaration were enshrined in the U.S. Constitution and Bill of Rights, which sought to create a government that would protect the rights and freedoms of the American people. Furthermore, the Declaration's ideas about liberty and equality inspired movements for freedom and independence around the world, including the French Revolution and struggles for civil rights in the United States. In conclusion, the American Declaration of Independence was a defining moment in the history of the United States and the world. It proclaimed the birth of a new nation founded on the principles of liberty, equality, and the right of the people to govern themselves. Its ideas continue to resonate today, serving as a symbol of the ongoing struggle for freedom, justice, and human rights. The Declaration not only marked the beginning of a new chapter in American history, but it also laid the groundwork for the global movement toward democracy and self-determination. The French Revolution begins. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, was a pivotal event in world history. It fundamentally altered the political, social, and economic landscape of France and had a profound impact on the rest of Europe and beyond. The revolution marked the end of centuries of absolute monarchy, aristocratic privilege, and the rigid class structure in France. It gave rise to the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity, which became the rallying cry of the revolutionaries and continue to resonate in modern political thought. The events that led to the revolution were complex and multifaceted, involving long-standing grievances, economic hardship, and a growing desire for political change. In the late 18th century, France was facing a series of significant challenges. The monarchy, led by King Louis XVI, was deeply in debt due to costly wars, including France's involvement in the American Revolution. The French economy was also strained by lavish spending by the royal court, the maintenance of a large military, and an inefficient tax system. The French nobility and clergy were exempt from many taxes, leaving the burden of taxation to fall on the common people, known as the Third Estate. This created widespread resentment among the poor, who were struggling to survive while the aristocracy lived in luxury. At the same time, France was suffering from a series of crop failures, which led to food shortages and soaring grain prices. This economic hardship worsened the situation for the peasants and urban poor, who were already suffering from high taxes and rising prices. The common people, especially in the cities, became increasingly disillusioned with the monarchy and its inability to address their needs. The Enlightenment, which was a period of intellectual growth in the 18th century, also played a role in inspiring calls for political and social reform. Philosophers such as John Locke, Montesquieu, and Jean-Jacques Rousseau argued for the rights of individuals, the importance of democracy, and the need to limit the power of the monarchy. In 1789, the financial crisis in France reached a breaking point. The government was unable to solve its fiscal problems, and Louis XVI called together the Estates General, a representative assembly made up of representatives from the three estates: the clergy, the nobility, and the common people. The Estates General had not been convened since 1614, and its role was supposed to help address France's financial troubles. However, tensions quickly arose during the proceedings. The representatives of the Third Estate, the common people, were frustrated by their lack of power in the Estates General. The First and Second Estates, clergy and nobility, held the majority of votes, leaving the Third Estate, despite representing the vast majority of the population, at a disadvantage. In response to their exclusion, the members of the Third Estate declared themselves the National Assembly, asserting their right to represent the people of France and to enact reforms. This move was seen as a direct challenge to the king's authority. In June 1789, the National Assembly found themselves locked out of their meeting hall. In response, they gathered in a nearby tennis court and took an oath not to disband until they had drafted a new constitution for France. This event, known as the Tennis Court Oath, marked a turning point in the revolution, signaling the beginning of a struggle for political power between the monarchy and the people. As tensions rose, the situation in Paris grew increasingly volatile. On July 14, 1789, a mob of Parisians stormed the Bastille, a medieval fortress and prison that symbolized royal tyranny. The fall of the Bastille was a symbolic victory for the revolutionaries, and it marked the beginning of widespread violence and unrest across France. The storming of the Bastille is now commemorated annually in France as Bastille Day, a national holiday symbolizing the triumph of the people over oppression. Following the storming of the Bastille, revolutionary fervor spread throughout France. In the countryside, peasants rose up against their feudal lords, burning documents that bound them to the old feudal system. This period of rural unrest, known as the Great Fear, led to widespread violence and the dismantling of the old social order. The National Assembly responded by abolishing feudal privileges and adopting the Declaration of the Rights of Man and Citizen on August 26, 1789. This document proclaimed the equality of all men before the law, the right to liberty and property, and the freedom of speech and religion. It laid the philosophical foundation for the revolution and became a key document in the history of human rights. Despite these gains, the revolution was far from over. In 1791, the National Assembly completed the drafting of a new constitution that established a constitutional monarchy, limiting the power of the king, and creating a system of elected representatives. However, the monarchy's power was severely weakened, and King Louis XVI's authority continued to decline. The revolutionaries grew more radical, and tensions with the royal family deepened. In 1792, the revolution entered a more radical phase. King Louis XVI and his family attempted to flee Paris in what became known as the Flight to Varennes, but they were captured and returned to the city. In September of that year, the monarchy was formally abolished, and France was declared a republic. King Louis XVI was put on trial, found guilty of treason, and executed by guillotine in January 1793. The revolution was now in full swing, and the struggle for control of France had entered its most intense and violent phase. The French Revolution, which began in 1789, was driven by a desire for justice, equality, and the end of absolute monarchy. While it initially aimed to limit the power of the king and reform French society, it soon devolved into a period of radicalism and violence, with the rise of figures like Maximilien Robespierre and the Reign of Terror. The revolution eventually gave way to the rise of Napoleon Bonaparte, who would go on to dominate European politics for years. Nevertheless, the French Revolution's impact on the world was profound, inspiring future movements for democracy, human rights, and the abolition of monarchy. The revolution's ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity continue to shape political thought to this day. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand of Austria on June 28, 1914, is widely regarded as the spark that ignited World War I. While the complex causes of the war involved long-standing political tensions, military alliances, and nationalist movements, the murder of the heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne in Sarajevo set off a chain of events that led to the mobilization of major European powers, eventually escalating into a global conflict. The assassination and its aftermath highlight the volatility of European diplomacy in the early 20th century and the dangers of unresolved national tensions. Franz Ferdinand was the heir presumptive to the Austro-Hungarian Empire, a vast and multi-ethnic monarchy that ruled over much of Central and Eastern Europe. His assassination occurred at a time when Europe was marked by political and military alliances, deep-rooted national rivalries, and increasing militarism. Austro-Hungary, in particular, was concerned about the rise of nationalism among Slavic peoples in its empire, especially in the region of Bosnia-Herzegovina, which had been annexed by Austro-Hungary in 1908. This action angered Serbia, a Slavic state that supported the independence of Slavic peoples under Austro-Hungarian rule. The assassination took place in Sarajevo, the capital of Bosnia-Herzegovina, on the anniversary of the Battle of Kosovo, a date that held particular significance for Serb nationalists. The assassination was carried out by a group of young Bosnian Serbs who were members of the Black Hand, a secret nationalist organization dedicated to the promotion of Slavic independence and the overthrow of Austro-Hungarian rule in the Balkans. The group, inspired by the idea of a Greater Serbia, hoped that by assassinating Franz Ferdinand, they could provoke a crisis that would lead to the weakening of Austro-Hungarian control and the creation of a unified Slavic state. The assassin who delivered the fatal blow to Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie was Gavrilo Princip, a 19-year-old Bosnian Serb. On the morning of June 28, Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were traveling through Sarajevo in a motorcade. Initially, an attempted assassination failed when one of the conspirators, Nedeljko Čabrinović, threw a grenade at the Archduke's car, but the grenade missed its target, bouncing off the folded-down convertible roof and exploding under another car in the motorcade, injuring bystanders. The failed attempt led to a moment of confusion, but Franz Ferdinand insisted on continuing his visit. As the Archduke's car took a new route to the hospital to visit those injured in the bombing, fate would intervene. Princip, who had been waiting at a street corner, saw the royal couple's car taking a wrong turn directly in front of him. He seized the opportunity and fired 2 shots from a pistol. The first shot hit Sophie, mortally wounding her, and the second struck Franz Ferdinand in the neck, killing him. Princip attempted to flee the scene but was captured by bystanders and arrested. Both Franz Ferdinand and Sophie were rushed to the hospital, but they were both declared dead soon after. The assassination shocked the world, and it sparked an immediate crisis in Europe. In the aftermath, Austria-Hungary, which had long been frustrated by Serbia's support of nationalist movements, used the assassination as a pretext to crush Serbian influence in the region. Austria-Hungary, with the backing of its ally Germany, issued an ultimatum to Serbia, demanding a series of harsh conditions, including the suppression of anti-Austrian propaganda and the removal of certain officials in Serbia who were thought to have ties to the assassination plot. Serbia, while willing to comply with many of the demands, balked at some of the more intrusive terms, especially those that would undermine its sovereignty. The failure to reach an agreement on the ultimatum led Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia on July 28, 1914. This declaration set off a complex web of alliances and treaties between the European powers. Russia, a traditional ally of Serbia, began to mobilize its forces in defense of the smaller nation. Germany, allied with Austria-Hungary, declared war on Russia on August 1st. France, allied with Russia, found itself drawn into the conflict, and Germany declared war on France on August 3rd. When Germany invaded Belgium as part of its strategy to attack France, Britain declared war on Germany on August 4th. Within a matter of days, the assassination had led to the involvement of all the major European powers, drawing the continent into a full-scale war. The assassination of Franz Ferdinand did not, in itself, cause World War I. The war had been building for decades due to a range of factors, including the rise of nationalism, militarism, and imperialism, as well as the complex system of alliances that had developed among European nations. However, the assassination acted as a catalyst, providing the immediate trigger for the outbreak of war. In a sense, the assassination revealed the fragility of the European balance of power, and how a single event could unravel decades of diplomacy and lead to catastrophic consequences. The consequences of the assassination were devastating. World War I, also known as the Great War, would last from 1914 to 1918, resulting in an estimated 16 million deaths, both military and civilian. It also led to the destruction of entire empires, including the Austro-Hungarian Empire, the Russian Empire, the German Empire, and the Ottoman Empire. The Treaty of Versailles, signed in 1919, formally ended the war but imposed harsh penalties on Germany, setting the stage for the rise of Adolf Hitler and the outbreak of World War II 2 decades later. The assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand and his wife Sophie remains one of the most significant and tragic events in modern history. It symbolizes the dangerous combination of nationalism, political intrigue, and the fragility of diplomatic relations. Though the assassination was carried out by a small group of conspirators, the consequences were felt across the globe, and the world would never be the same again. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima on August 6, 1945, was one of the most pivotal and controversial moments of World War II. This event not only marked the first and only time nuclear weapons have been used in warfare, but also played a significant role in bringing the conflict to a close, while simultaneously raising profound questions about the morality of nuclear warfare and its long-term implications. The decision to drop the bomb on Hiroshima was the culmination of a long process involving scientific discovery, military strategy, and political considerations. By 1945, World War II had already ravaged much of Europe and Asia, but the conflict in the Pacific between the United States and Japan was far from over. Japan's refusal to surrender and its fierce resistance in battles such as Iwo and Okinawa signaled that the country was prepared to fight to the bitter end. The United States, under President Harry S. Truman, sought a way to force Japan's surrender without the need for a costly invasion of the Japanese mainland, which was projected to result in a high number of casualties on both sides. At the same time, the development of a new and powerful weapon, the atomic bomb, provided a potential means of achieving that goal. The origins of the atomic bomb date back to the early 20th century, when scientists first began to understand the potential of nuclear energy. In 1938, German physicists Otto Hahn and Fritz Strassmann discovered nuclear fission, the process by which the nucleus of an atom can be split, releasing a vast amount of energy. This discovery sparked further research, and it wasn't long before scientists realized the possibility of using fission to create an extraordinarily powerful weapon. In 1939, Albert Einstein, along with physicist Leo Szilard, warned President Franklin D. Roosevelt about the potential for Nazi Germany to develop an atomic bomb. In response, Roosevelt authorized the establishment of the Manhattan Project, a secret American research program tasked with developing nuclear weapons. Led by scientists such as Robert Oppenheimer, Enrico Fermi, and Niels Bohr, the project made rapid advancements in harnessing nuclear energy for military use. By 1945, the Manhattan Project had successfully developed the world's first atomic bombs. The first test, known as the Trinity test, took place in July 1945 in the New Mexico desert. The explosion, which released an immense amount of energy, demonstrated the devastating potential of the weapon. The success of the test marked a turning point in the war, giving the United States a powerful new tool in its efforts to defeat Japan. At the time, Japan had already endured extensive bombing raids, including the firebombing of Tokyo, which had caused massive destruction and loss of life. However, Japan's leadership remained committed to fighting on, with the emperor and military leaders refusing to surrender. The United States believed that using the atomic bomb could bring about Japan's unconditional surrender and end the war swiftly, potentially saving hundreds of thousands of lives that would be lost in an invasion of the Japanese home islands. On August 6, 1945, the Enola Gay, a B-29 bomber piloted by Colonel Paul Tibbets, took off from the island of Tinian in the Pacific Ocean. The bomb it carried, named Little Boy, was a uranium-based weapon. As the aircraft reached Hiroshima, a city of approximately 350,000 people, it dropped the bomb at 8:15 a.m. local time. The explosion, which occurred about 600 meters above the city, unleashed the equivalent of approximately 15,000 tons of TNT, vaporizing the area surrounding the explosion and causing widespread destruction. The bomb killed an estimated 70,000 to 80,000 people instantly, with many more dying in the following weeks and months due to the effects of radiation exposure. The city itself was almost entirely destroyed, with over 60% of its buildings reduced to rubble. Those who survived the initial blast were left to contend with severe burns, radiation sickness, and the trauma of witnessing the devastation. The human toll of the bombing was immense, and the effects of the radiation would continue to haunt the survivors, known as hibakusha, for the rest of their lives. The decision to use the atomic bomb on Hiroshima has remained a subject of intense debate and moral questioning. Supporters of the decision argued that the bomb was necessary to end the war quickly and save lives, as it was believed that an invasion of Japan would result in a staggering number of casualties on both sides. The bombing of Hiroshima, followed by the dropping of another bomb on Nagasaki 3 days later, led to Japan's surrender on August 15, 1945, effectively ending World War II. Japan's surrender was formalized on September 2, 1945, aboard the USS Missouri in Tokyo Bay. However, critics of the bombing have pointed out the immense human suffering it caused, questioning whether it was justified. Many argue that Japan was already on the verge of surrender and that other means of achieving peace, such as a demonstration of the bomb's power or a negotiated settlement, could have been pursued. Others contend that the use of nuclear weapons on civilian populations set a dangerous precedent for future conflicts, leading to an arms race and the development of even more powerful weapons in the decades that followed. The legacy of the Hiroshima bombing is far-reaching. It marked the beginning of the nuclear age, a period defined by the threat of mutually assured destruction, where the potential for global annihilation became a reality due to the existence of nuclear weapons. The bombing also led to widespread anti-nuclear movements and efforts to prevent the proliferation of nuclear arms. In Japan, Hiroshima and Nagasaki became symbols of the horrors of war and the human cost of nuclear weapons. The cities, along with the survivors, have worked tirelessly to promote peace and nuclear disarmament, emphasizing the need for international cooperation to prevent the use of such weapons in the future. In conclusion, the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima was a defining moment in world history, ending the war with Japan, but also raising profound ethical, political, and humanitarian questions that continue to shape global discourse. The tragedy of Hiroshima serves as a powerful reminder of the devastating potential of nuclear weapons and the need for responsible governance, diplomacy, and global cooperation to ensure that such a catastrophic event is never repeated. The Moon Landing. The moon landing on July 20, 1969, stands as one of the most significant achievements in human history. It marked the culmination of years of scientific research, engineering innovation, and intense political and cultural competition. The event was not only a triumph for the United States and NASA, but also a moment of global celebration, as it symbolized the extraordinary potential of human ingenuity and determination. The Apollo 11 mission, which carried astronauts Neil Armstrong, Buzz Aldrin, and Michael Collins to the moon, represented a defining moment in the space race between the United States and the Soviet Union during the Cold War era. The space race began in earnest in the late 1950s, when the Soviet Union launched Sputnik 1, the first artificial satellite, into orbit in 1957. The launch of Sputnik shocked the world and sparked fears in the United States that the Soviets were ahead in the race for technological dominance, especially in space exploration. In response, President Dwight D. Eisenhower and his successors, particularly President John F. Kennedy, sought to accelerate American space efforts to catch up with and surpass the Soviet Union's space achievements. In 1961, Kennedy boldly declared that the United States would land a man on the moon and return him safely to Earth by the end of the decade. This commitment was driven not only by the desire for national prestige, but also by a sense of urgency and the need to demonstrate American technological superiority during the Cold War. Kennedy's vision led to the creation of NASA's Apollo program, a massive, multi-billion-dollar effort that would eventually put a man on the moon. The Apollo program faced numerous technical and logistical challenges. The spacecraft needed to be developed, along with the Saturn V rocket that would carry the astronauts to space, the lunar module, which would land on the moon's surface and then return to the command module, had to be designed and tested. Additionally, astronauts had to undergo extensive training to prepare for the rigors of spaceflight, including zero-gravity conditions, spacewalks, and the ability to navigate in space. The Apollo 11 mission was launched on July 16, 1969, from Kennedy Space Center in Florida. The spacecraft consisted of 3 components: the command module, Columbia, where the astronauts would spend most of their time, the lunar module, Eagle, which would land on the moon, and the service module, which provided additional support and propulsion. The crew of Apollo 11 consisted of Neil Armstrong, the mission commander, Buzz Aldrin, the lunar module pilot, and Michael Collins, the command module pilot. After a successful launch, the Apollo 11 spacecraft entered lunar orbit on July 19, 1969. The following day, Armstrong and Aldrin boarded the lunar module Eagle to begin their descent to the moon's surface, while Collins remained in orbit around the moon in the command module, Columbia. The descent to the lunar surface was fraught with challenges, as the lunar module's landing site was filled with boulders and craters. Armstrong, who was piloting the lunar module, had to manually guide it to a safer landing spot, narrowly avoiding a rocky area that could have endangered the mission. At 4:17 p.m. Eastern Time on July 20, 1969, the Eagle successfully touched down on the moon. Neil Armstrong, who had been the first to land on the moon, famously spoke the words, "Houston, Tranquility Base here. The Eagle has landed," signaling to Mission Control that the landing was successful. As Armstrong prepared to step out of the lunar module, he uttered the historic words, "That's one small step for a man, one giant leap for mankind." Armstrong then descended the ladder and became the first human to set foot on the moon's surface. He was followed shortly by Buzz Aldrin, who joined him on the surface, and together they spent about 2 hours conducting experiments, collecting rock samples, and taking photographs. The moon landing was watched by millions of people around the world via live television broadcasts. The images of Armstrong and Aldrin walking on the moon, with the Earth visible in the background, were a stunning visual testament to human achievement. The landing marked a victory not just for the United States, but for all of humanity, as it demonstrated what could be accomplished when nations focused on peaceful exploration and technological innovation. After their historic walk, Armstrong and Aldrin returned to the lunar module and lifted off from the moon's surface to rendezvous with Collins in the command module. The trio then returned to Earth, splashing down in the Pacific Ocean on July 24, 1969. The successful completion of Apollo 11 was a remarkable accomplishment, cementing the legacy of the mission and the astronauts involved. The significance of the moon landing extends far beyond its immediate impact on the space race. It represented a dramatic leap in human understanding and technological capability. It demonstrated that humanity could overcome immense challenges and reach beyond the confines of our planet. The Apollo 11 mission also opened the door to further exploration of the moon, and the subsequent Apollo missions expanded our knowledge of the lunar surface and the possibilities of space exploration. However, the moon landing was not without controversy. Some criticized the immense cost of the Apollo program, especially given the social and political issues the United States was grappling with at the time, including the civil rights movement and the Vietnam War. Others questioned the need for such a mission when there were pressing issues on Earth that required attention. Nevertheless, the moon landing remains a symbol of human perseverance and a testament to the potential of scientific discovery. In the years following the Apollo 11 mission, humanity's focus on lunar exploration waned. The subsequent Apollo missions, including Apollo 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17, helped expand our understanding of the moon, but the political climate and shifting priorities led to the cancellation of further lunar missions. Still, the legacy of Apollo 11 and the moon landing continues to inspire future space exploration, including missions planned for Mars and beyond. In conclusion, the moon landing on July 20th, 1969, was a defining moment in human history. It showcased the power of human innovation, determination, and collaboration, and it left an indelible mark on the world. The legacy of Apollo 11 continues to inspire scientific advancements, space exploration, and the unyielding spirit of discovery that pushes humanity to explore the unknown. The invention of the printing press. The invention of the printing press, one of the most transformative breakthroughs in human history, forever altered the course of society, culture, and intellectual life. Its development can be credited primarily to Johannes Gutenberg, a German blacksmith, goldsmith, printer, and publisher, who, in the mid-15th century, developed a movable-type printing system that revolutionized the production of books and documents. Before the printing press, books were painstakingly hand-copied by scribes, which made them rare, expensive, and inaccessible to the majority of people. The process was slow and error-prone, often resulting in copies with inaccuracies or inconsistencies. The high cost of books meant that they were typically reserved for the elite classes, the clergy, and scholars. This limited the spread of knowledge and ideas, keeping literacy rates low and ensuring that intellectual and cultural advancements moved at a sluggish pace. Gutenberg's breakthrough came when he developed a method for movable-type printing. This innovation allowed individual letters and characters to be arranged and rearranged on a page, making it possible to print multiple copies of a text quickly and efficiently. His most famous achievement, the Gutenberg Bible, printed around 1455, marked the first major book to be produced using this movable-type technique. It was a monumental achievement both in terms of the technology behind its creation and the sheer quality of the finished product. The printing press worked by using a mechanical press to apply ink to the movable type, which was then pressed onto paper. This made the process much faster than hand copying, as an entire page could be printed in a matter of hours, compared to days or weeks for a scribe to copy a book by hand. Furthermore, the invention of metal movable type allowed for greater durability and precision compared to previous wooden type, which often warped or deteriorated over time. The impact of Gutenberg's invention was nothing short of revolutionary. It lowered the cost of producing books, making them more affordable and accessible to a wider range of people. For the first time in history, books became available to ordinary people, not just the wealthy or clergy. This democratization of knowledge had profound effects on society. As books became more common, literacy rates rose, and education became more widespread. People no longer had to rely solely on the oral tradition or the few elite scholars who could afford and access written texts. In addition to making books more accessible, the printing press played a critical role in the spread of ideas. The Renaissance, the Reformation, and the scientific revolution were all facilitated by the availability of printed materials. Thinkers like Martin Luther, whose 95 theses were rapidly reproduced and distributed thanks to the printing press, could spread their ideas quickly and to a vast audience. Similarly, works by scientists and philosophers such as Copernicus and Galileo were able to reach a broader public and influence the direction of modern science. The printing press also revolutionized the way information was disseminated. Newspapers, pamphlets, and broadsides could now be printed and distributed to a wide audience, enabling the rapid spread of news, political ideas, and propaganda. This changed the nature of communication, fostering a more informed public, and contributing to the rise of public opinion as a powerful force in politics and society. However, the printing press did not come without controversy. The mass production of books and printed materials also meant that ideas could be disseminated that challenged the status quo. Religious leaders, particularly the Catholic Church, were alarmed by the spread of Protestant ideas facilitated by printed works. The press played a significant role in the Protestant Reformation, leading to the rise of new religious denominations and the fragmentation of the Christian Church. In the centuries that followed, the printing press continued to evolve, leading to the development of more advanced technologies such as the steam-powered printing press in the 19th century. However, Gutenberg's original invention remained a cornerstone of the modern world. It laid the groundwork for the rapid dissemination of knowledge, fostering intellectual and cultural advancements that continue to shape society to this day. The printing press was not merely an invention, it was a catalyst for change. It shifted the balance of power in society, enabling new voices and ideas to emerge, and played a central role in shaping the world as we know it. Without the printing press, the rapid spread of knowledge, the rise of literacy, and the flourishing of the Renaissance and Enlightenment may not have been possible, highlighting the profound and enduring legacy of this remarkable invention. The Protestant Reformation. The Protestant Reformation was a seismic shift in the history of Christianity, marking the beginning of the end for the religious and political monopoly of the Catholic Church in Europe. This movement, which began in the early 16th century, challenged the practices, authority, and doctrines of the Catholic Church, ultimately leading to the establishment of Protestant denominations and the reshaping of the religious landscape of Europe. The catalyst for the Reformation was Martin Luther, a German monk, theologian, and professor, who became increasingly disillusioned with the corruption and practices of the Catholic Church. Luther's most famous act of defiance occurred in 1517 when he nailed his 95 Theses to the door of the castle church in Wittenberg. These theses were a series of propositions criticizing the sale of indulgences, a practice in which the church sold certificates to absolve sins, promising forgiveness of past or future sins in exchange for money. Luther argued that the sale of indulgences was a corrupt practice that misled believers into thinking they could buy their way into heaven. He also questioned the Church's authority to grant forgiveness and its claim that salvation could be earned through acts of piety and penance. Luther's primary belief was that salvation could only be attained through faith in Jesus Christ, not through works or church rituals, a doctrine known as justification by faith alone. Luther's ideas spread rapidly, in part due to the recent invention of the printing press. This new technology allowed his 95 Theses and other writings to be distributed far beyond Wittenberg, reaching an audience of scholars, clergy, and ordinary people. What began as a critique of church practices quickly turned into a broader theological and ecclesiastical challenge. Luther's ideas struck a chord with many who felt that the Catholic Church had become overly wealthy, corrupt, and distant from the teachings of Christ. In 1521, Luther was excommunicated by Pope Leo X and declared an outlaw by Emperor Charles V at the Diet of Worms. However, Luther was protected by local princes and supporters who believed his reforms were necessary to curb the Church's power. This period of political and religious upheaval saw Luther's ideas gain significant traction across Europe, especially in the Holy Roman Empire, Scandinavia, and parts of Switzerland. Luther was not the only figure of the Reformation. Other reformers, such as John Calvin, Ulrich Zwingli, and Thomas Cranmer, played crucial roles in the development of Protestantism. Calvin, a French theologian, expanded on Luther's ideas and developed the doctrine of predestination, which emphasized God's sovereign choice in salvation. In England, King Henry VIII's break with the Catholic Church in the 1530s led to the formation of the Church of England, a Protestant church that maintained many Catholic traditions but rejected papal authority. One of the central issues of the Reformation was the question of authority. Protestants rejected the Catholic Church's claim that it was the sole interpreter of Scripture. Instead, they advocated for sola scriptura, the idea that the Bible alone was the ultimate source of authority for Christians. This emphasis on Scripture led to the translation of the Bible into vernacular languages, making it more accessible to laypeople. In contrast, the Catholic Church had insisted on maintaining Latin as the language of Scripture, which limited access to the Bible to clergy and educated elites. The Reformation also led to significant social, political, and cultural changes. The fragmentation of Christianity gave rise to religious conflict, with wars breaking out between Protestant and Catholic states. The 30 Years' War, 1618 to 1648, was one of the most devastating conflicts in Europe, as Protestant and Catholic forces fought for religious and political dominance. The Reformation also laid the groundwork for the rise of modern secularism, as it challenged the Church's political power and influence. In addition to religious divisions, the Reformation sparked an intellectual revolution. The questioning of church authority led to the rise of new ideas about individual liberty, democracy, and the relationship between church and state. Many Protestant ideas, particularly those regarding the role of the individual in relation to God, influenced later movements such as the Enlightenment and the American and French Revolutions. The Catholic Church responded to the Reformation with the Counter-Reformation, a series of reforms and efforts to reaffirm Catholic doctrine. The Council of Trent, 1545 to 1563, was a key component of this movement, where the Church clarified its teachings and addressed some of the issues raised by Protestant reformers. The Catholic Church also launched a campaign of religious persecution, including the Inquisition and the establishment of the Jesuit order, to combat Protestantism. Ultimately, the Protestant Reformation was a defining moment in the history of Christianity in Europe. It shattered the religious unity of Christendom, leading to the formation of various Protestant denominations and the weakening of papal authority. It also set the stage for the modern age, with its emphasis on individual conscience, the authority of Scripture, and the separation of church and state. In conclusione, la riforma protestante fu un movimento religioso che cambiò profondamente la struttura della Chiesa e della società europea. Non solo ha dato vita a nuove denominazioni cristiane, ma ha anche portato a un cambiamento radicale nelle relazioni politiche, nelle tradizioni culturali e nelle pratiche religiose. Nonostante le sue origini in Germania, la riforma si diffuse rapidamente in tutta Europa, segnando l'inizio di un nuovo capitolo nella storia della religione e della civiltà occidentale. The Abolition of Slavery. The abolition of slavery was one of the most significant and transformative movements in human history. It marked the end of centuries of systematic oppression, in which millions of people were forcibly taken from their homelands, bought and sold as property, and subjected to brutal exploitation and dehumanization. The abolitionist movement, which gained momentum in the late 18th and 19th centuries, was a global struggle that ultimately led to the emancipation of enslaved people in many parts of the world. Slavery, in various forms, existed in many cultures throughout history, but the transatlantic slave trade, which lasted from the 16th to the 19th centuries, was one of the most infamous and damaging. It involved the forced transportation of African people to the Americas, where they were put to work on plantations, in mines, and in other industries. The wealth generated by this system was central to the economies of many European colonial powers, particularly Britain, France, Portugal, and Spain, as well as the United States. The idea of slavery as a deeply immoral institution began to take root in the 18th century, fueled by the rise of Enlightenment ideas that emphasized individual rights, liberty, and equality. Philosophers such as John Locke, Jean-Jacques Rousseau, and Montesquieu questioned the moral basis of slavery and argued for the inherent rights of all human beings. In the Americas, the ideals of the American Revolution, including all men are created equal, also inspired growing opposition to slavery. One of the first significant movements against slavery emerged in Britain, where abolitionists such as Granville Sharp, Thomas Clarkson, and William Wilberforce began to campaign against the transatlantic slave trade. The formation of the Society for Effecting the Abolition of the Slave Trade in 1787 marked a pivotal moment in the movement. Abolitionists used moral arguments, legal strategies, and public campaigns to expose the horrors of the slave trade and to build a broad coalition of support. One of the most effective methods was the use of petitions and public demonstrations, which garnered widespread attention to the issue. The abolitionist movement was also greatly aided by the testimony of former slaves who shared their harrowing stories of captivity and abuse. One of the most famous former slaves to become an abolitionist was Olaudah Equiano, whose autobiography helped humanize the plight of enslaved people and sway public opinion. The rise of the abolitionist press also played a key role, with publications like The Liberator in the United States, edited by William Lloyd Garrison, providing a platform for anti-slavery voices. In 1707, Britain became one of the first countries to pass a law prohibiting the transatlantic slave trade with the Act for the Abolition of the Slave Trade. This victory was the result of decades of activism and public pressure, and it set the stage for further efforts to end slavery in British colonies. However, it was not until 1833 that slavery itself was fully abolished in the British Empire, with the passage of the Slavery Abolition Act, which freed all enslaved people in the colonies, including the Caribbean and Canada. In the United States, the abolition movement gained momentum over the course of the 19th century, particularly in the northern states. Abolitionists like Frederick Douglass, Harriet Tubman, and Sojourner Truth fought tirelessly to end slavery through speeches, writings, and direct action. The Underground Railroad, a network of secret routes and safe houses, helped thousands of enslaved people escape to freedom in the northern states and Canada. Despite violent resistance from pro-slavery factions, the movement grew in strength, particularly with the publication of Uncle Tom's Cabin by Harriet Beecher Stowe in 1852, which galvanized public opinion against slavery. The issue of slavery was a major catalyst for the outbreak of the American Civil War, 1861 to 1865. President Abraham Lincoln, who had long opposed the expansion of slavery into new territories, issued the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863, declaring that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory were free. This executive order was a decisive step toward the eventual abolition of slavery in the United States. In 1865, the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution was ratified, officially abolishing slavery throughout the entire country. This legal victory, however, did not mark the end of the struggle for racial equality. Although enslaved people were freed, they continued to face discrimination, segregation, and violence, especially in the South. The abolition of slavery was a monumental achievement, but it was also just the beginning of a longer struggle for human rights and social justice. The global abolitionist movement had profound effects, not only on the lives of formerly enslaved people, but also on the political and social dynamics of entire nations. While slavery is no longer legally practiced in most parts of the world, modern-day forms of slavery, such as human trafficking and forced labor, still exist, reminding us that the fight for freedom and equality remains ongoing. The fall of the Roman Empire. The fall of the Roman Empire is one of the most debated and significant events in history, marking the end of one of the most powerful and influential civilizations in the ancient world. The decline of Rome was not the result of a single event, but rather a complex combination of internal weaknesses and external pressures that ultimately led to its downfall. This process occurred over several centuries, culminating in the collapse of the Western Roman Empire in 476 CE. Rome's transformation from a republic to an empire began in the 1st century BCE, when Julius Caesar's rise to power ended the Roman Republic and established the Roman Empire. For several hundred years, the Roman Empire expanded rapidly, controlling vast territories across Europe, the Middle East, and North Africa. At its height, the empire spanned over 3 continents and was a symbol of military might, political organization, and cultural influence. However, cracks began to appear in the empire long before its ultimate fall. One of the most significant factors in the empire's decline was its internal instability. The Roman Empire was vast, and managing such an enormous territory proved to be increasingly difficult. As the empire expanded, its leadership became more fragmented, and emperors often struggled to maintain control. This led to political corruption, infighting, and power struggles, as different factions vied for control of the empire. The division of the empire into the Western and Eastern Roman empires in 395 CE by Emperor Theodosius further exacerbated this issue. Economic troubles also contributed to the empire's decline. The cost of maintaining the military, supporting the bureaucracy, and funding public infrastructure placed enormous strain on the Roman economy. As the empire's borders expanded, the need for a larger and more expensive army grew. The influx of wealth from conquered territories initially supported the empire's economy. But as the empire's territorial expansion slowed, so did the flow of resources. Meanwhile, rampant inflation and high taxes further strained the economy, and many Romans were forced into poverty. Another key factor in the fall of the Roman Empire was the pressure exerted by external enemies. During the 4th and 5th centuries, the empire faced numerous invasions by various barbarian groups, such as the Visigoths, Vandals, and Huns. In 410 CE, the Visigoths, led by Alaric I, famously sacked Rome, marking the first time in over 800 years that the city had been captured by a foreign enemy. The empire was unable to defend itself effectively, and the once feared Roman legions were no longer the formidable force they had been in earlier centuries. In 455 CE, the Vandals sacked Rome again, further weakening the empire's prestige and power. The Huns, led by Attila, also played a significant role in the empire's decline. Their invasions in the 5th century destabilized large areas of the Roman Empire and forced many barbarian groups to migrate, some of whom settled within Roman territories. These migrations further destabilized the empire's borders and contributed to its downfall. By the mid-5th century, the Western Roman Empire had become a shell of its former self, with its emperors little more than figureheads, while barbarian chieftains wielded real power. The decline of the Western Roman Empire culminated in 476 CE, when the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus, was deposed by Odoacer, a Germanic chieftain. Odoacer's rise to power marked the formal end of the Western Roman Empire and the beginning of the Middle Ages in Europe. The Eastern Roman Empire, known as the Byzantine Empire, continued to survive for another 1,000 years, until its fall in 1453 CE with the conquest of Constantinople by the Ottoman Turks. While the Western Roman Empire collapsed, its legacy lived on. Roman law, architecture, and culture influenced the development of European civilization for centuries. Christianity, which had been adopted as the state religion by Emperor Constantine in the early 4th century, became the dominant religion in Europe and played a significant role in shaping the future of the continent. The fall of the Roman Empire was not an isolated event, but rather a long and drawn-out process, influenced by a range of internal and external factors. Its collapse marked the end of ancient Rome's dominance, but it also paved the way for the rise of new civilizations and the eventual emergence of medieval Europe. Despite its fall, the Roman Empire's contributions to law, governance, and culture continue to shape the modern world. The rise of the Internet. The rise of the Internet is one of the most transformative events in modern history, radically changing how we communicate, learn, work, and interact with the world. What began as a small network for academic and government research has evolved into a global system that connects billions of people and devices, influencing nearly every aspect of contemporary life. The story of the Internet's rise is one of technological innovation, collaboration, and the increasing need for a connected world. The origins of the Internet can be traced back to the 1960s, when the United States Department of Defense funded a project called ARPANET, Advanced Research Projects Agency Network. ARPANET was created as a way to connect computers at different universities and research institutions, allowing for the sharing of data and resources. It was intended to be a resilient network that could survive disruptions, such as those caused by potential military conflicts, by decentralizing data storage and transmission. The first successful transmission on ARPANET occurred in 1969, marking the beginning of what would later become the Internet. The 1970s and 1980s saw significant developments that laid the groundwork for the global network we use today. One of the key innovations during this time was the creation of the Transmission Control Protocol, TCP, and the Internet Protocol, IP, developed by Vinton Cerf and Robert Kahn. These protocols standardized how data was transmitted over networks, ensuring that different systems could communicate with each other. This was crucial in creating a network of networks, a fundamental concept that would eventually become the modern Internet. In the early 1990s, the Internet began to take on a more recognizable form with the invention of the World Wide Web by British computer scientist Tim Berners-Lee. Berners-Lee developed a system that allowed documents to be linked together using hypertext, creating a web of information that could be accessed through browsers. The introduction of the first web browser, Mosaic, in 1993, made it easier for people to navigate the Internet and access content. The World Wide Web allowed for the creation of websites, e-commerce, and online communication platforms, which sparked an explosion of activity on the Internet. The 1990s also saw the rise of early Internet companies, such as AOL, Yahoo, and Amazon, which played a pivotal role in popularizing the Internet and expanding its reach. The proliferation of personal computers in homes and businesses, combined with the development of faster dial-up connections, brought the Internet to a wider audience. By the late 1990s, millions of people around the world were accessing the Internet regularly, and the dot-com boom fueled massive investment in Internet-based companies. However, it was the early 2000s that truly marked the rise of the Internet as an essential part of everyday life. Broadband Internet connections, which provided faster and more reliable access, became widely available, replacing the slower dial-up connections. This enabled the development of new services such as video streaming, online gaming, and social media platforms, which became central to the online experience. The launch of social media platforms like Facebook, 2004, Twitter, 2006, and YouTube, 2005, transformed how people communicated and shared information. These platforms made it possible for individuals to connect with friends and family, share content, and even build communities around shared interests. The Internet became a place for social interaction, entertainment, and news, fundamentally altering how we consume and interact with media. The rise of smartphones in the late 2000s further accelerated the Internet's growth, as mobile devices allowed people to access the Internet on the go. The release of the iPhone in 2007 revolutionized the smartphone market, and apps became an integral part of the Internet experience, enabling users to shop, bank, navigate, and engage in social activities from their pockets. E-commerce, which began with companies like Amazon and eBay in the late 1990s, has since become a dominant force in the global economy. Online shopping is now a major part of daily life, with consumers turning to the Internet for everything from groceries to clothing to electronics. The rise of companies like Google, Apple, Amazon, and Facebook has reshaped the global economy, and the Internet has become a critical infrastructure for business, education, and government. The Internet has also brought about a digital revolution in many sectors, such as education, healthcare, and entertainment. Online learning platforms, telemedicine, and streaming services have made it easier for people to access knowledge, healthcare, and entertainment regardless of geographic location. However, the rise of the Internet has not been without challenges. Issues such as cybersecurity, online privacy, misinformation, and digital inequality have emerged as significant concerns. The Internet has created new avenues for criminal activity, while the rapid spread of false information has raised questions about the role of social media in shaping public opinion. Despite these challenges, the Internet's rise has been one of the most transformative events of the modern age, reshaping the way people live, work, and interact with one another. As technology continues to evolve, the Internet will undoubtedly play an even more integral role in shaping the future. The signing of the Treaty of Versailles. The Treaty of Versailles, signed on June 28, 1919, marked the official end of World War I, one of the most devastating conflicts in human history. The treaty was signed at the Palace of Versailles in France, exactly 5 years after the assassination of Archduke Franz Ferdinand, an event that triggered the war. The treaty aimed to establish lasting peace in Europe, but instead sowed the seeds of political and economic unrest that would contribute to the outbreak of World War II 2 decades later. The Treaty of Versailles was negotiated among the Allied powers, including France, Britain, and Italy, while Germany, the principal central power, was excluded from the discussions. The treaty was the result of months of negotiations that were primarily dominated by the Big Four: French Premier Georges Clemenceau, British Prime Minister David Lloyd George, Italian Prime Minister Vittorio Orlando, and U.S. President Woodrow Wilson. These leaders had differing objectives, which influenced the treaty's provisions. One of the most influential figures at the negotiations was Clemenceau, who represented a France that had suffered immense losses during the war. The French had experienced widespread devastation, both in terms of human casualties and infrastructure, particularly in the northern regions of France. Clemenceau's primary aim was to ensure that Germany would never again be able to threaten France. To this end, he pushed for harsh reparations and territorial losses for Germany, believing that these measures would weaken Germany's military capacity and prevent future conflict. David Lloyd George, the British Prime Minister, was in a somewhat more complicated position. On the one hand, Britain had been deeply affected by the war, with heavy casualties and economic costs. On the other hand, Lloyd George had to consider the political realities at home, where public sentiment was less inclined toward severe punishment of Germany. While he agreed to many of the treaty's punitive measures, including reparations and territorial concessions, he also sought to preserve Germany as a stable power to prevent future instability in Europe. U.S. President Woodrow Wilson, on the other hand, had a very different vision. Wilson had proposed his 14 points in 1918 as the basis for peace, which included the establishment of the League of Nations, a new international organization aimed at preventing future wars. His ideal was to create a fair and just peace, based on principles such as self-determination for nations, open diplomacy, and free trade. Wilson's vision, however, was compromised by the demands of the European powers, particularly France, which insisted on punitive measures against Germany. The treaty's provisions were harsh and far-reaching. Germany was required to accept full responsibility for the war under Article 231, the so-called War Guilt Clause. This clause placed the blame for the war solely on Germany and its allies, a point that was deeply resented by the German people and led to widespread feelings of humiliation and injustice. In addition, Germany was forced to make significant territorial concessions. The Saar Basin and the provinces of Alsace and Lorraine were returned to France, and Germany lost all of its overseas colonies. The city of Danzig was declared a free city, and large parts of eastern Germany were ceded to Poland. Germany's military capacity was also severely restricted. The treaty limited the size of the German army to 100,000 troops, banned conscription, and prohibited Germany from having an air force, submarines, or tanks. Furthermore, the Rhineland, a strategically important region, was demilitarized, meaning no German military forces could be stationed there. Perhaps the most contentious aspect of the treaty was the imposition of reparations. Germany was required to pay vast sums of money to compensate the Allied powers for the damages caused during the war. The exact amount was not determined at the time, but would later be set at 132 billion gold marks, an amount that crippled the German economy and led to widespread resentment among the population. While the treaty officially ended the war, it failed to bring lasting peace. The severe terms imposed on Germany fostered bitterness and anger, which would later be exploited by Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. Furthermore, the treaty's failure to address the underlying issues of nationalism, ethnic divisions, and economic instability contributed to the instability that would later lead to World War II. Another significant consequence of the Treaty of Versailles was the creation of the League of Nations, which Wilson had advocated for. However, the League's effectiveness was severely undermined by the refusal of the United States to join, as the U.S. Senate voted against ratifying the treaty. This left the League without the support of the world's most powerful country, limiting its ability to enforce peace and resolve conflicts. In conclusion, the signing of the Treaty of Versailles was a momentous event that officially ended World War I, but also sowed the seeds of future conflict. Its harsh terms, particularly towards Germany, and its failure to address the deeper issues that caused the war, contributed to political instability in Europe. While it aimed to create a lasting peace, the treaty's legacy is one of bitterness and controversy, ultimately paving the way for the rise of fascism and the outbreak of World War II. The September 11th terrorist attacks. The 9/11 terrorist attacks were a series of coordinated assaults carried out by the Islamic extremist group Al-Qaeda on September 11, 2001. These attacks changed the course of history, leading to widespread global security overhauls, the initiation of the War on Terror, and profound shifts in U.S. foreign policy. The events of that fateful day shocked the world, causing nearly 3,000 deaths and triggering a cascade of political, social, and economic consequences that are still felt today. The attacks began early in the morning of September 11th, when 19 Al-Qaeda terrorists hijacked 4 commercial airplanes. These individuals, led by Osama bin Laden, had meticulously planned the assaults for months with the goal of striking symbols of American power and influence. Each of the 4 flights was directed toward a specific target in the U.S., and the hijackers took control of the planes after they had departed from airports along the East Coast. 2 of the planes, American Airlines Flight 11 and United Airlines Flight 175, were flown into the Twin Towers of the World Trade Center in New York City. The first plane struck the North Tower at 8:46 a.m., and the second hit the South Tower at 9:03 a.m. The impact of the crashes and the subsequent fires caused by the jet fuel weakened the steel structures of the buildings. Within an hour, both towers collapsed, causing massive destruction and sending a cloud of debris, dust, and smoke across lower Manhattan. The collapse of the Twin Towers killed nearly 2,750 people, including office workers, firefighters, police officers, and paramedics who were responding to the scene. Meanwhile, the third hijacked plane, American Airlines Flight 77, was directed toward the Pentagon, the U.S. Department of Defense's headquarters in Arlington, Virginia. The plane crashed into the western side of the Pentagon at 9:37 a.m., killing 125 people inside the building, along with all 64 passengers and crew members on board. The impact of the crash, along with the resulting fire, caused significant damage to the Pentagon, but the structure remained standing. This attack targeted not only a symbol of military might, but also the nerve center of U.S. defense operations. The fourth plane, United Airlines Flight 93, was headed for a target in Washington, D.C., believed to be either the White House or the U.S. Capitol. However, passengers on board fought back against the hijackers, led by Todd Beamer, who famously shouted, "Let's roll!" The passengers' bravery prevented the plane from reaching its intended target, and it crashed into a field in Shanksville, Pennsylvania, at 10:03 a.m. All 44 people aboard were killed, but their actions likely saved many lives in Washington, D.C. The attacks were meticulously planned by Al-Qaeda, an extremist Islamist group founded by Osama bin Laden in the late 1980s. Bin Laden's hatred for the United States was rooted in a number of factors, including U.S. support for Israel, military presence in Saudi Arabia, and involvement in conflicts in the Middle East. The attacks were intended to retaliate against what Al-Qaeda saw as U.S. imperialism and to strike at the heart of American power. In the wake of the September 11th attacks, the U.S. and the world were left in a state of shock and mourning. The devastation was not only physical, but psychological as well, as Americans and people around the globe grappled with the scale of the tragedy. The U.S. government quickly responded with a series of measures aimed at addressing the immediate crisis and preventing future attacks. President George W. Bush declared a war on terror and vowed to bring those responsible to justice. One of the first steps was the invasion of Afghanistan, where Al-Qaeda had its base of operations under the Taliban regime. The U.S. military, along with NATO forces, launched Operation Enduring Freedom in October 2001 to dismantle Al-Qaeda and remove the Taliban from power. The operation initially succeeded in toppling the Taliban and targeting key Al-Qaeda leaders, but the conflict continued for years. Domestically, the U.S. government passed a series of measures aimed at preventing further attacks. The USA Patriot Act, signed into law in October 2001, expanded law enforcement powers in surveillance, border security, and counterterrorism efforts. The creation of the Department of Homeland Security in 2002 consolidated U.S. agencies focused on national security and emergency preparedness. The 9/11 attacks had a profound impact on global security. Countries around the world heightened their vigilance and implemented stricter security measures, especially in air travel. The attacks also led to a wave of anti-terrorism laws, military interventions, and intelligence sharing agreements. While the 9/11 attacks devastated families and communities, they also led to an outpouring of solidarity and heroism. The bravery of the first responders, the passengers on Flight 93, and countless others who risked their lives in the aftermath became a symbol of resilience and courage. The attacks also spurred a global conversation on terrorism, security, and the complexities of geopolitics, which continues to shape international relations to this day. In the years following the attacks, the search for justice continued. Osama bin Laden remained at large until May 2, 2011, when U.S. Navy SEALs located and killed him in a compound in Pakistan. However, the legacy of 9/11 is far-reaching and enduring, as it fundamentally changed the world in ways that continue to be felt, both domestically and internationally. The Renaissance begins. The Renaissance, a period of profound cultural, intellectual, and artistic transformation, marks one of the most influential eras in human history. Spanning from the 14th to the 17th centuries, it is widely regarded as a bridge between the Middle Ages and the modern era. While its beginnings are often associated with Italy, the Renaissance had far-reaching effects across Europe. The movement sought to revive the classical learning, values, and aesthetics of ancient Greece and Rome, leading to remarkable advancements in the arts, science, and philosophy. The Renaissance didn't occur overnight. Rather, it was the result of a series of social, political, and economic changes that set the stage for its emergence. The roots of the Renaissance can be traced back to the late Middle Ages, a time characterized by feudalism, religious dominance, and a generally stagnant economy in much of Europe. The fall of Constantinople in 1453, along with the recovery from the Black Death, helped pave the way for a shift in thinking that sparked the Renaissance. The catastrophic effects of the Black Death, which decimated Europe's population between 1347 and 1351, resulted in labor shortages, social upheaval, and the decline of feudal structures. This created opportunities for new ideas, greater social mobility, and the rethinking of traditional institutions. Central to the beginning of the Renaissance was the rediscovery of classical texts. Scholars in Italy began to seek out and study the works of ancient Greek and Roman philosophers, historians, and scientists, many of which had been preserved in Byzantine libraries or were rediscovered in the ruins of ancient Rome. This rediscovery of classical antiquity was seen as a way to escape the constraints of the Middle Ages and return to the intellectual vigor of the ancient world. Figures such as Petrarch and Boccaccio in Italy, often regarded as precursors of the Renaissance, played crucial roles in reviving classical thought and literature. Another key factor in the emergence of the Renaissance was the growth of Italian city-states. Cities like Florence, Venice, and Milan became wealthy and powerful through trade, banking, and commerce. These city-states were centers of economic activity, where new ideas and innovations could thrive. Wealthy patrons, such as the Medici family in Florence, supported artists, architects, and scholars, helping to fund the creation of groundbreaking works of art and scholarship. The Medici family, in particular, is credited with being one of the most influential patrons of the Renaissance. Cosimo de' Medici and his grandson Lorenzo de' Medici, known as Lorenzo the Magnificent, provided financial support to some of the era's greatest artists and thinkers. The Italian Renaissance, which began in Florence in the late 14th century, was characterized by a renewed focus on humanism, a philosophy that emphasized the potential and achievements of human beings. Humanism encouraged individuals to study subjects such as rhetoric, history, poetry, and philosophy, all of which were viewed as essential for personal development and contributing to society. Humanists believed that by studying the classics, they could better understand the human condition and promote virtuous living. This shift in intellectual focus was accompanied by dramatic changes in art and architecture. Artists like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, and Raphael revolutionized the use of perspective, light, and shadow in their works, creating more realistic and expressive representations of the human form. Leonardo's Vitruvian Man and Michelangelo's frescoes on the ceiling of the Sistine Chapel exemplify the Renaissance ideals of human beauty and proportion, as well as the interest in the classical world. The Renaissance also saw the invention of new artistic techniques, such as oil painting and linear perspective, which gave artists more control over the visual representation of space and light. The beginnings of the Renaissance also coincided with significant advancements in science and technology. The invention of the printing press by Johannes Gutenberg in the mid-15th century was a game-changer. It allowed for the mass production of books, making literature, scientific knowledge, and philosophical ideas more widely accessible. The press played a crucial role in spreading Renaissance humanism and helped to disseminate new ideas across Europe. In addition to the flourishing of arts and learning, the Renaissance was a period of exploration and discovery. The voyages of explorers like Christopher Columbus and Vasco da Gama expanded European knowledge of the world and opened up new trade routes, further contributing to the prosperity of European nations. The age of exploration was closely tied to the Renaissance, as it was fueled by the spirit of curiosity and a desire to expand knowledge and influence. Although the Renaissance began in Italy, its ideas quickly spread across Europe, particularly to France, Spain, and the Low Countries, where the influence of humanism and classical learning began to reshape education, politics, and the arts. The movement laid the foundations for the modern world, influencing everything from the scientific revolution to the Enlightenment. In conclusion, the Renaissance began as a cultural rebirth rooted in the rediscovery of classical antiquity and a renewed interest in human potential. It was shaped by the intellectual and economic changes of the time, as well as the patronage of wealthy families like the Medici. The period saw groundbreaking developments in art, science, and literature, which forever altered the trajectory of Western civilization. The Renaissance remains a symbol of creativity, intellectual inquiry, and the enduring pursuit of knowledge. The storming of the Bastille. The storming of the Bastille, which occurred on July 14, 1789, is one of the most iconic and significant events of the French Revolution. It symbolizes the beginning of the end for the old regime in France and is often seen as a powerful representation of the people's struggle for liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Bastille, a medieval fortress and prison in Paris, was not only a symbol of royal tyranny, but also a focal point for the growing discontent with King Louis XVI's regime. The event marked a decisive turning point in the revolution and has been commemorated annually in France as Bastille Day, a national holiday. The causes of the storming of the Bastille can be traced back to widespread social, political, and economic discontent that had been building in France for decades. By the late 18th century, France was suffering from severe economic hardship. The country's finances were in disarray due to its involvement in costly wars, including the American Revolution, and the lavish spending of King Louis XVI and Queen Marie Antoinette. This, combined with poor harvests, rising food prices, and widespread poverty, led to mounting frustration among the French population, especially the peasants and urban working class. In addition to the economic crisis, France was also grappling with a political system that was deeply entrenched in privilege and inequality. The nobility and clergy enjoyed significant tax exemptions and political power, while the common people, who made up the majority of the population, were burdened with heavy taxes and had little say in governance. The Estates General, a representative assembly made up of 3 estates, the clergy, the nobility, and the commoners, had not been convened for over 170 years, and the common people were increasingly frustrated by their lack of representation. In May 1789, King Louis XVI called together the Estates General to address the financial crisis, but disagreements soon arose between the estates, particularly over voting procedures. The commoners, known as the Third Estate, demanded greater representation and ultimately declared themselves the National Assembly, signaling their intent to create a new constitution. The king, unwilling to yield to their demands, responded by locking the doors of the meeting hall, prompting the members of the National Assembly to swear the famous tennis court oath, vowing not to disband until a new constitution was established. In the weeks that followed, tensions continued to rise. The political crisis deepened, and rumors began circulating in Paris that the king was preparing to use military force to dissolve the National Assembly. At the same time, economic hardship and food shortages were causing widespread unrest in the capital. The people of Paris were desperate, and they saw the storming of the Bastille as a way to strike a blow against the monarchy and the injustices of the old regime. On the morning of July 14th, a crowd of several thousand Parisians gathered outside the Bastille, a massive fortress and prison located in the eastern part of the city. The Bastille was symbolic of royal oppression and tyranny, and it housed a small number of prisoners, many of whom were political dissidents. The building also contained a significant amount of gunpowder and weapons, which the Parisians hoped to seize in order to defend themselves against the king's forces. The crowd initially demanded the release of the prisoners and the surrender of the fortress. At first, the governor of the Bastille, Bernard-René de Launay, tried to negotiate with the crowd, but tensions quickly escalated. As the situation became more volatile, the governor ordered his soldiers to fire on the protesters. This only intensified the anger of the crowd, and soon they broke through the gates of the Bastille, overwhelming the small garrison inside. The prisoners were released, and the gunpowder and weapons were seized. Governor de Launay was taken prisoner, and after being dragged through the streets of Paris, he was executed by the crowd. The storming of the Bastille was a significant victory for the people of Paris, and a powerful symbol of the revolution. It demonstrated the strength of popular mobilization and the determination of the common people to challenge the authority of the monarchy. The event also marked the beginning of the widespread collapse of royal authority in France. Following the storming of the Bastille, the National Assembly began to take more radical steps toward dismantling the old regime, including the abolition of feudal privileges and the declaration of the rights of man and of the citizen. In the aftermath of the storming, the French Revolution gained momentum. The fall of the Bastille was followed by the establishment of the National Guard under the leadership of revolutionary hero Marquis de Lafayette, and King Louis XVI was forced to accept the changes that were sweeping across the country. The revolutionaries continued to push for more radical reforms, leading to the eventual execution of the king and the rise of more extreme factions, including the Jacobins, who would dominate the revolution in the years to come. The storming of the Bastille has remained a potent symbol of the fight against oppression and the quest for justice and equality. It is celebrated every year on July 14th as Bastille Day, a national holiday in France where parades, fireworks, and festivities honor the spirit of the French Revolution and the ideals of liberty, equality, and fraternity. The Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation, issued by President Abraham Lincoln on January 1, 1863, is one of the most significant documents in American history. It declared the freedom of all enslaved people in Confederate-held territories during the Civil War, a pivotal moment in the fight against slavery and the transformation of the United States. While the proclamation did not immediately free all enslaved individuals, it marked a turning point in the nation's moral, political, and social landscape, setting the stage for the eventual abolition of slavery and the passage of the 13th Amendment. The roots of the Emancipation Proclamation lie in the deeply entrenched institution of slavery in the Southern states. By the early 1860s, slavery was an integral part of the Southern economy, particularly in the cotton-producing states, where enslaved labor fueled much of the agricultural industry. However, the moral and political divide over slavery had long been a source of tension between the North and the South. Abolitionists in the North, including many political leaders and social reformers, viewed slavery as a great injustice that needed to be eradicated, while Southern leaders fought to preserve the institution as essential to their way of life. The Civil War, which began in 1861, was initially fought over the secession of Southern states and the preservation of the Union, rather than the issue of slavery. However, as the war progressed, it became increasingly clear that the fate of slavery was intertwined with the future of the United States. Lincoln, who had been elected president in 1860, initially sought to prevent the spread of slavery into new territories, rather than immediately abolishing it. But as the war dragged on and the Confederate States defied the federal government, Lincoln began to recognize that slavery needed to be addressed as part of the Union's war effort. The turning point came in 1862, after a series of key Union victories and mounting pressure from abolitionists and African American leaders. Lincoln understood that the emancipation of enslaved people in the South would weaken the Confederate war effort, which relied heavily on enslaved labor. It would also serve as a moral statement that aligned the Union's cause with the principles of freedom and equality. Moreover, freeing enslaved people could provide a new source of manpower for the Union Army, as many African Americans were eager to fight for their freedom. In September 1862, Lincoln issued the preliminary Emancipation Proclamation, warning that he would free all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory unless the Southern states rejoined the Union by January 1, 1863. The proclamation was part of Lincoln's strategy to gain an advantage in the war, weaken the Confederacy, and shift the moral narrative of the conflict. When no Southern states complied with the demand, Lincoln moved forward with the final version of the Emancipation Proclamation. The Emancipation Proclamation declared that all enslaved people in Confederate-held territory shall be then, thenceforward, and forever free. The proclamation specifically applied to areas in the Confederacy that were not under Union control, leaving slavery intact in the border states that remained loyal to the Union, such as Kentucky and Missouri. Although the proclamation did not immediately free any enslaved people, as it applied only to regions outside Union control, it signaled a shift in U.S. policy and law. The Emancipation Proclamation also authorized the enlistment of African American soldiers in the Union Army. This decision was crucial, as it allowed over 180,000 African Americans, both free and formerly enslaved, to join the Union forces and fight for their freedom. Their participation was vital to the Union's eventual victory, and the presence of African American soldiers was a powerful symbol of the new vision for America that Lincoln sought to create. The proclamation had profound effects on both the Union and the Confederacy. For the Union, it gave the war a moral purpose, turning the fight to preserve the nation into a battle for human freedom. It rallied abolitionists and African American activists, providing them with a tangible victory. On the other hand, for the Confederacy, it intensified the conflict, as it undermined the foundation of the Southern economy and threatened the social order that had been built on slavery. The Emancipation Proclamation did not immediately abolish slavery in the United States, but it was a crucial step toward the eventual end of the institution. The document paved the way for the passage of the 13th Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which was ratified in December 1865, after the conclusion of the Civil War. The 13th Amendment permanently abolished slavery throughout the United States, ensuring that the promise of freedom outlined in the Emancipation Proclamation was fully realized. In conclusion, the Emancipation Proclamation was a landmark moment in American history. It not only changed the course of the Civil War, but also marked the beginning of the end for slavery in the United States. By declaring the freedom of enslaved people and allowing African Americans to fight for the Union, Lincoln's proclamation helped to reshape the nation's ideals of liberty and equality. It remains one of the most enduring symbols of the struggle for freedom and justice in America's history. The birth of the United Nations. The United Nations, UN, an international organization founded in 1945, stands as a testament to the hope of creating a world united by peace, cooperation, and human rights. Its creation was a direct response to the devastation wrought by the Second World War, which left the global community shattered and in need of a new framework for diplomacy, peacebuilding, and collaboration. The UN's birth was rooted in the ideal of preventing future conflicts, promoting social progress, and ensuring that fundamental human rights were upheld worldwide. Before the United Nations, there was the League of Nations, formed after World War I to promote peace and prevent further conflicts. However, the League ultimately failed to prevent the rise of totalitarian regimes such as Nazi Germany, and could not avert the outbreak of World War II. In the aftermath of this catastrophic war, the global community recognized that a stronger and more effective international organization was necessary. The idea of the United Nations began to take shape during the war itself. In 1941, U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt and British Prime Minister Winston Churchill signed the Atlantic Charter, a declaration of shared principles for a post-war world. It outlined the vision for a global organization dedicated to maintaining peace and fostering social and economic cooperation. This vision would later be realized in the form of the UN. In 1945, as World War II neared its end, the Allied powers began to plan for the post-war world order. The pivotal moment came during the Yalta Conference, held in February 1945, where Roosevelt, Churchill, and Soviet Premier Joseph Stalin met to discuss the structure of the emerging international system. One of the key decisions made at Yalta was the agreement to establish an international organization to replace the League of Nations. The United Nations was envisioned as a more robust and inclusive organization, with provisions for collective security and the involvement of major global powers in decision-making. The United States, the Soviet Union, the United Kingdom, and China were to serve as the permanent members of the Security Council, ensuring that their influence was central to the maintenance of international peace and security. The formal groundwork for the United Nations was laid in April 1945 at the San Francisco Conference, where representatives from 50 nations gathered to draft the UN Charter. The conference, which lasted for 2 months, was a momentous occasion in the history of diplomacy. Delegates from across the globe worked tirelessly to create a document that would address the failures of the League of Nations and establish a new system of global cooperation. The drafting of the Charter was not without its challenges, as the representatives from various countries had different priorities and political views. However, they were united by a common goal: to create an institution that would prevent future wars and promote social progress. The result was the United Nations Charter, which laid out the principles and structure of the organization. It emphasized the importance of human rights, the peaceful resolution of disputes, and the prevention of armed conflict. On June 26, 1945, the UN Charter was signed by 50 nations in San Francisco, marking the official birth of the United Nations. The Charter came into effect on October 24, 1945, when the required number of ratifications were achieved. This day, now celebrated annually as United Nations Day, symbolizes the commitment of member states to the principles of peace, justice, and cooperation. The establishment of the UN marked the beginning of a new era in international relations, where nations work together to address global challenges such as poverty, inequality, and human rights abuses. Despite its challenges and criticisms over the years, the United Nations has remained a central player in global diplomacy, peacekeeping, and development. The Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution, which began in the late 18th century and continued into the 19th century, was a period of profound economic, social, and technological transformation. It marked the shift from agrarian economies, where most people worked in agriculture or craft-based industries, to industrialized societies dominated by factories and mechanized production. This revolution not only reshaped the economy, but also transformed the way people lived, worked, and interacted with the world around them. The roots of the Industrial Revolution can be traced back to Great Britain, where a combination of factors laid the groundwork for the radical changes that followed. These included an abundance of natural resources such as coal and iron, which were essential for powering new machinery and building infrastructure. Additionally, Britain had a well-developed banking system, a growing population, and a colonial empire that provided access to raw materials and markets for finished goods. The first major breakthrough of the Industrial Revolution was the development of new machinery that greatly increased production efficiency. The invention of the steam engine by James Watt in the 1760s was a pivotal moment. The steam engine provided a reliable and efficient source of power for factories, mines, and transportation. This innovation made it possible to build factories away from water sources, which had previously been required to power mills, and it facilitated the growth of industries like textiles, iron, and coal mining. The textile industry was one of the first to be transformed by mechanization. Innovations like the spinning jenny, the water frame, and the power loom allowed for faster and more efficient production of textiles. This led to the creation of large factories that employed hundreds and eventually thousands of workers. The rapid expansion of the textile industry in Britain fueled the demand for cotton, leading to the establishment of global trade routes that connected Britain to its colonies in India and the Americas. With the rise of factories, the need for a new type of labor force became clear. The shift from rural agricultural work to urban factory work led to the rapid growth of cities. People from rural areas moved to towns and cities in search of work, creating the phenomenon of urbanization. This migration led to overcrowded living conditions, poor sanitation, and the spread of disease in many industrial centers. Factory work, especially for women and children, was often grueling, with long hours, low wages, and dangerous working conditions. Despite these challenges, the Industrial Revolution brought about significant improvements in living standards for many. The increased production of goods led to lower prices and greater availability of products, making them more accessible to the average person. Transportation also saw revolutionary advancements, with the construction of railways and the introduction of steam-powered ships, which enabled faster movement of goods and people. This facilitated trade, boosted economies, and helped to spread the effects of industrialization to other parts of the world. The Industrial Revolution also spurred significant social and political changes. It contributed to the rise of new social classes, particularly the industrial capitalist class and the working class. It also prompted the development of labor movements and the push for reforms in working conditions, wages, and child labor. In time, these movements led to the establishment of labor laws and improved rights for workers. Globally, the Industrial Revolution had a far-reaching impact, sparking similar changes in countries like the United States, Germany, and Japan. It played a key role in the rise of capitalism and the expansion of Western influence across the world. However, it also contributed to the exploitation of natural resources and labor, and its environmental consequences became increasingly evident. Ultimately, the Industrial Revolution was a defining moment in world history, marking the transition from traditional agrarian economies to modern industrialized societies. It shaped the world we live in today, influencing everything from technology and economics to social structures and global trade. The invention of the telephone. The invention of the telephone is one of the most significant milestones in the history of communication. It revolutionized the way people connected across distances and reshaped the world socially, economically, and politically. While the idea of transmitting sound over long distances had been a goal for many inventors, it was Alexander Graham Bell who is most commonly credited with inventing the telephone in the late 19th century. The concept of the telephone was born out of Bell's deep interest in sound and speech. Born in Edinburgh, Scotland, in 1847, Bell's early life was marked by a family background in speech and communication. His mother was deaf, and his father was a renowned expert on speech, which likely influenced his lifelong passion for understanding how sound works. Bell became a teacher of the deaf in Boston and spent a significant amount of time studying how sounds could be transmitted. The groundwork for the invention of the telephone began when Bell and his colleagues were exploring the possibility of transmitting voice over electrical wires. At the time, telegraphy was the primary means of long-distance communication. The telegraph allowed people to send coded messages in the form of Morse code, but it could not transmit actual sound or human speech. Bell believed that it might be possible to send the human voice itself as an electrical signal through a wire. Bell's first breakthrough came in 1875 when he, along with his assistant Thomas Watson, began experimenting with sound transmission. They were trying to improve the telegraph, but they stumbled upon a key idea: the possibility of using electrical currents to transmit sound vibrations. In June 1875, Bell and Watson succeeded in transmitting the first recognizable sound, a simple musical note, over a wire. This was a crucial step toward their ultimate goal of transmitting speech. On March 10, 1876, Bell made history with the first successful telephone call. While working in his laboratory in Boston, he spoke the famous words to Watson: "Mr. Watson, come here, I want to see you." Watson, who was in another room, heard the message clearly through the telephone, proving that the transmission of speech was indeed possible. This breakthrough marked the dawn of a new era in communication. Bell was awarded the first U.S. patent for the invention of the telephone on March 7, 1876, just a few days before the famous call to Watson. However, Bell was not the only one working on the concept of transmitting sound via electrical signals. At the same time, Elisha Gray, an American inventor, was working on a similar invention. Gray filed his patent for a telephone on the same day as Bell, leading to a highly publicized legal battle over who had priority in the invention. Ultimately, Bell's patent was upheld, and he became widely recognized as the inventor of the telephone. The invention of the telephone quickly sparked widespread interest, and by the late 1870s, the first telephone lines were being set up in cities like Boston and New York. The telephone industry began to grow rapidly, and in 1877, Bell founded the Bell Telephone Company, which later became part of AT&T, one of the largest telecommunications companies in the world. The telephone revolutionized communication by making it possible for people to speak directly to one another over long distances, something that had previously been impossible. It had profound implications for business, politics, and daily life, shrinking the world and connecting people in ways that had never been possible before. In the decades that followed, the telephone continued to evolve. Early devices were bulky and limited, but over time, the development of new technologies, such as the rotary dial, mobile phones, and digital telecommunication, transformed the telephone into the essential global tool we use today. The invention of the telephone not only changed the way humans communicate, but also paved the way for a host of other innovations that continue to shape modern society. Bell's work laid the foundation for the telecommunications industry, and his creation remains one of the most influential inventions of the modern world. The Great Depression hits. The Great Depression, which began in 1929 and lasted for much of the 1930s, remains one of the most severe and far-reaching economic crises in modern history. It marked a period of widespread unemployment, poverty, and hardship, not only in the United States, but across much of the world. The Depression had profound social, political, and economic consequences that reshaped the global landscape for decades. The origins of the Great Depression can be traced back to several factors, including the economic boom of the 1920s, an era known as the Roaring Twenties, when the U.S. economy was growing rapidly. The decade was marked by speculation in the stock market, mass production, and the widespread use of consumer credit. However, this prosperity was built on shaky foundations, and by the end of the decade, the economy had become increasingly unstable. The turning point came on October 29, 1929, a day that would come to be known as Black Tuesday. On that day, the U.S. stock market experienced a catastrophic crash. Stock prices plummeted, and panic spread among investors. The crash wiped out billions of dollars in wealth, causing thousands of businesses to fail and plunging the economy into a downward spiral. While the stock market crash was a key trigger, it was not the sole cause of the Great Depression. Other factors, such as banking failures, overproduction, and the collapse of international trade, also contributed to the crisis. Following the crash, the U.S. economy began to unravel. Banks, which had invested heavily in the stock market, were unable to recover their losses and began failing in large numbers. As people lost confidence in the banking system, they rushed to withdraw their savings, further deepening the crisis. By 1933, nearly 9,000 banks had failed in the United States alone, leaving millions of people without access to their life savings. Unemployment soared as businesses closed their doors and factories shut down. At the peak of the Depression, around 25% of the U.S. workforce was unemployed. The effects of the Depression were not confined to the United States. The global economy was deeply interconnected, and many countries suffered similar fates. International trade slowed to a standstill, as countries imposed tariffs in an attempt to protect their economies. In Europe, the economic strain contributed to political instability, and in Germany, the Depression played a role in the rise of Adolf Hitler and the Nazi Party. The impact on everyday life was devastating. Families lost their homes, and many people were forced to live in makeshift shelters or on the streets. Food scarcity was widespread, and long lines for soup kitchens became a common sight in cities. The Depression also led to mass migrations as people in search of work traveled across the country. In the U.S., the Dust Bowl, a series of severe droughts in the Midwest, compounded the suffering, displacing hundreds of thousands of farmers. In response to the crisis, the U.S. government under President Franklin D. Roosevelt implemented a series of bold reforms and programs designed to provide relief, recovery, and reform. Known as the New Deal, these measures included the creation of jobs through public works projects, banking reforms, and the establishment of social safety nets like unemployment insurance and Social Security. The New Deal helped alleviate some of the immediate suffering caused by the Depression and laid the foundation for modern social welfare programs. While the Great Depression did not fully end until the outbreak of World War II, its effects were felt for many years. It transformed the relationship between the U.S. government and its citizens, leading to a greater role for the federal government in economic affairs. The Depression also influenced global economic policy, contributing to the rise of Keynesian economics, which emphasized government intervention in the economy. The Great Depression serves as a stark reminder of the fragility of the global economy and the profound consequences of economic mismanagement. It reshaped political ideologies, changed social structures, and left an indelible mark on the collective memory of the world. The Launch of Sputnik. The launch of Sputnik 1 on October 4, 1957, by the Soviet Union marked a historic moment in the space race and forever changed the world's perception of technology and exploration. As the first artificial satellite to orbit the Earth, Sputnik's successful launch not only signaled a major technological achievement, but also initiated a new era of political and scientific competition between the United States and the Soviet Union, known as the space race. Sputnik, meaning satellite or companion in Russian, was a spherical satellite about the size of a beach ball, measuring roughly 22 inches in diameter and weighing 184 pounds. It was equipped with 4 long antennae and transmitted a simple radio signal back to Earth. Although its design was relatively simple compared to later space technology, its successful launch demonstrated the Soviet Union's advanced capabilities in rocket science and space exploration. The launch of Sputnik 1 was the result of years of research and development by the Soviet Union's space program, which was headed by engineer Sergei Korolev, often called the father of the Soviet space program. Korolev and his team had developed a powerful intercontinental ballistic missile ICBM that was capable of sending a satellite into orbit. The Soviets had successfully tested the R-7 ICBM, which was adapted to launch Sputnik into space. The impact of Sputnik's launch on the world was immediate and profound. In the United States, it sparked fear and anxiety. The success of the Soviet Union in launching a satellite into orbit was seen as a technological and ideological triumph during the Cold War, a time when the U.S. and the USSR were locked in intense geopolitical rivalry. Many Americans feared that the launch of Sputnik was evidence of Soviet superiority in science and technology, particularly in military capabilities. The idea that the Soviets had the ability to launch rockets capable of reaching the U.S. territory raised concerns about national security. In response, the U.S. government intensified its focus on science and technology. President Dwight D. Eisenhower, who initially tried to downplay the significance of the Sputnik launch, quickly shifted his stance and made space exploration a national priority. In 1958, the United States established NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration, to coordinate civilian space exploration efforts and to ensure that the U.S. remained competitive in space science. Sputnik's impact was not limited to military and political concerns. It also had profound scientific and cultural implications. The launch of the satellite demonstrated the feasibility of space travel and sparked a wave of interest in science, technology, and mathematics. In schools across the United States, there was an emphasis on math and science education, a shift aimed at producing the next generation of scientists and engineers who could compete with the Soviets in space exploration. The Soviets followed up their initial success by launching Sputnik 2 on November 3, 1957, which carried the first living creature into space, Laika, a dog. While the Sputnik missions were viewed with a mixture of awe and trepidation in the West, they were an important milestone in the broader history of human space exploration. The Soviet Union continued its space achievements with the first successful lunar impact and the first human spaceflight by Yuri Gagarin in 1961. In the long run, the launch of Sputnik set the stage for the space exploration achievements that followed, including the U.S. Apollo moon landing in 1969. It also highlighted the importance of space as both a scientific endeavor and a tool for national prestige. The space race would dominate global geopolitics and technological innovation for much of the 20th century. Sputnik 1 itself completed 1,440 orbits of Earth before re-entering the atmosphere and burning up on January 4, 1958. Despite its brief existence, the launch of Sputnik had an enduring impact on the world, marking the beginning of humanity's journey into space and changing the course of history. The discovery of penicillin. The discovery of penicillin in 1928 by Scottish bacteriologist Alexander Fleming is widely regarded as one of the most significant medical breakthroughs of the 20th century. This remarkable discovery revolutionized medicine, saving millions of lives and paving the way for the development of modern antibiotics. The story of penicillin's discovery is one of serendipity, scientific curiosity, and the relentless pursuit of knowledge. In 1928, Alexander Fleming was working at St. Mary's Hospital in London, studying bacteria and their behavior. He was investigating the effects of various substances on bacterial growth when he made an unexpected observation that would forever change the course of medicine. One day, while examining a petri dish of Staphylococcus bacteria that he had left uncovered on a workbench, Fleming noticed something unusual. A spore of mold had grown on the dish, and the bacteria surrounding the mold were dying. The mold, later identified as a strain of Penicillium notatum, appeared to release a substance that killed the bacteria. Fleming was intrigued by this observation and began conducting experiments to isolate and study the mold's active ingredient. He found that the substance released by the mold could effectively kill a wide variety of bacteria, including the dangerous pathogens responsible for diseases like pneumonia, scarlet fever, and diphtheria. Fleming dubbed this substance penicillin after the mold genus Penicillium. However, while Fleming had discovered the antibacterial properties of penicillin, isolating it in a pure, usable form proved to be a significant challenge. Fleming's early work on penicillin was groundbreaking, but it was not immediately recognized as a potential therapeutic agent. He struggled to develop the substance into something that could be used in clinical settings. The problem lay in the difficulty of producing penicillin in large quantities and the instability of the substance, which degraded too quickly to be effective as a medicine. Nonetheless, Fleming's discovery was a crucial step forward in understanding the potential for using microorganisms to fight bacterial infections. The real breakthrough came in the early 1940s when scientists in both Britain and the United States took up the challenge of mass-producing penicillin. The key figure in this effort was British chemist Sir Howard Florey, along with his colleagues Sir Norman Heatley and Sir Edward Abraham. Florey and Heatley successfully developed methods to produce penicillin on a large scale, including the use of deep fermentation tanks to cultivate the mold and extract penicillin in substantial quantities. This process was further refined by researchers at institutions like the University of Oxford, where Florey's team worked in collaboration with American pharmaceutical companies. By the time of World War II, penicillin was ready for widespread use. The drug was used to treat soldiers wounded in battle, preventing infections that would otherwise have been fatal. Penicillin's success in treating infections like pneumonia and sepsis led to a dramatic reduction in mortality rates and transformed the treatment of bacterial infections worldwide. It is often credited with saving countless lives during the war and has since become the prototype for the development of other antibiotics. The discovery of penicillin marked the beginning of the antibiotic era, which would bring about the development of many other life-saving drugs. Penicillin also sparked the search for other antimicrobial substances, leading to the development of antibiotics like streptomycin, tetracycline, and erythromycin. Today, penicillin remains one of the most widely used antibiotics in the world, although the rise of antibiotic resistance has become a major concern in recent decades. Nonetheless, the impact of penicillin on medicine is undeniable. It ushered in a new age of medical treatments, transforming the way doctors could combat infectious diseases and saving millions of lives in the process. Fleming, Florey, and Heatley's work on penicillin earned them the Nobel Prize in Physiology or Medicine in 1945, cementing the importance of their discovery in medical history. The story of penicillin is not just a tale of scientific triumph, but also a testament to the power of observation, collaboration, and perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The Coronation of Charlemagne. The coronation of Charlemagne as Emperor of the Romans in the year 800 is one of the most significant events in European history. Charlemagne, also known as Charles the Great, was the king of the Franks and Lombards, and his coronation marked the revival of the Western Roman Empire, which had fallen more than 3 centuries earlier. This momentous event laid the foundation for what would later be known as the Holy Roman Empire, a central institution in medieval Europe. Charlemagne, born around 747, was the son of Pepin the Short and the grandson of Charles Martel, a military leader famous for his victory at the Battle of Tours in 732, which halted the expansion of Muslim forces into Western Europe. After his father's death in 768, Charlemagne inherited the kingdom of the Franks, which stretched across much of modern-day France and Germany. Over the course of his reign, Charlemagne expanded his empire through a series of military campaigns, including the conquest of the Saxons and the defeat of the Lombards in Italy, making him the most powerful ruler in Western Europe. The coronation of Charlemagne took place on Christmas Day, 800, in St. Denis, Peter's Basilica in Rome. The Pope at the time, Pope Leo III, had fled to Rome after being assaulted and humiliated by enemies in the city. He sought Charlemagne's protection and support, and Charlemagne agreed to intervene. Charlemagne's presence in Rome was a sign of his power and influence, and he helped restore Pope Leo to his position. On that fateful day, as Charlemagne attended Christmas Mass at St. Peter's Basilica, Pope Leo III placed a crown on his head and declared him Emperor of the Romans. Charlemagne, who had not anticipated this, was taken by surprise, but accepted the title. The Pope's act of crowning Charlemagne was a symbolic gesture that connected the Frankish kingdom to the legacy of the ancient Roman Empire, re-establishing the idea of a Christian Roman Empire in the West. The coronation of Charlemagne as emperor was a pivotal moment in medieval European history for several reasons. First, it marked the re-emergence of the idea of a Roman Empire in the West after the fall of the Western Roman Empire in 476. Although the Eastern Roman Empire, also known as the Byzantine Empire, had continued to thrive in the East, the crowning of Charlemagne was seen as a direct challenge to the authority of the Byzantine Emperor in Constantinople. The Byzantines, led by Empress Irene at the time, viewed Charlemagne's coronation as a threat to their claim to the legacy of Rome. This rivalry between the eastern and western branches of the Roman Empire would persist for centuries. Charlemagne's coronation also solidified the relationship between the Frankish monarchy and the Catholic Church. By accepting the title of emperor from the Pope, Charlemagne effectively placed himself under the Church's spiritual authority, while the Pope gained the protection of a powerful ruler. This partnership helped to cement the role of the Catholic Church as a central institution in medieval Europe and gave the Pope significant influence over political affairs. The coronation of Charlemagne also had lasting consequences for the structure of medieval Europe. Charlemagne's reign marked the beginning of what historians refer to as the Carolingian Renaissance, a period of cultural revival in art, learning, and architecture. Charlemagne promoted the education of clergy and nobles, encouraging the preservation of classical texts and the development of a more standardized system of writing. His empire became a center of Christian culture and intellectual life, which would have a profound impact on the development of European civilization. Charlemagne's coronation set the stage for the Holy Roman Empire, an institution that would persist, in various forms, for over 1,000 years. Charlemagne's empire did not last long after his death in 814, as it was divided among his sons, but his legacy lived on through the institutions and cultural developments he fostered. The idea of a Christian Roman Empire would influence European rulers for centuries, shaping the political landscape of the Middle Ages and beyond. The assassination of John F. Kennedy. The assassination of John F. Kennedy, the 35th President of the United States, on November 22, 1963, remains one of the most tragic and shocking events in American history. The assassination not only ended the life of a beloved leader, but also marked a turning point in American politics, culture, and society. It left the nation in mourning and deeply shaken, and it has continued to provoke debate, conspiracy theories, and investigation for decades. On the day of the assassination, Kennedy was visiting Dallas, Texas, as part of a political campaign trip to smooth over tensions within the Democratic Party in the state. The trip had been planned to help gather support for his re-election campaign in 1964. Kennedy, along with his wife Jacqueline, Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, and other political figures, traveled in a motorcade through downtown Dallas. The motorcade was a highly publicized event, and large crowds lined the streets to see the president. Kennedy's car, a convertible, was part of the procession as it made its way through Dealey Plaza. At approximately 12:30 p.m., as the motorcade passed the Texas School Book Depository building, shots rang out. 3 bullets were fired from a 6th-floor window of the building, hitting Kennedy in the upper back and neck, and one of the shots also struck Texas Governor John Connally, who was seated beside him in the car. Kennedy was rushed to Parkland Memorial Hospital, but doctors were unable to save him. He was pronounced dead at 1 p.m. Central Standard Time. The news of his death spread quickly, and within moments, the nation was plunged into grief and disbelief. Vice President Lyndon B. Johnson, who had been in the motorcade, was quickly taken to safety and sworn in as the 36th President of the United States aboard Air Force One, while the nation struggled to come to terms with the loss of their leader. Shortly after the shooting, police arrested Lee Harvey Oswald, a 24-year-old former Marine, for the murder of Kennedy. Oswald was found in a nearby movie theater after allegedly shooting a Dallas police officer. The evidence linking Oswald to the assassination was compelling, including eyewitness testimony, ballistics reports, and the discovery of a rifle at the scene that was traced to Oswald. He was charged with the murder of Kennedy and the police officer, J.D. Tippit, whom Oswald had shot and killed shortly after the assassination. However, Oswald's arrest and subsequent death sparked widespread speculation and conspiracy theories. On November 24, 1963, 2 days after the assassination, Oswald was shot and killed by nightclub owner Jack Ruby while being transferred from the city jail to the county jail. This event further fueled suspicions and gave rise to numerous conspiracy theories suggesting that Oswald had not acted alone or that other individuals or groups were involved in the assassination. The Warren Commission, established by President Johnson to investigate Kennedy's assassination, concluded in 1964 that Lee Harvey Oswald acted alone in killing the president. Despite this official report, many Americans remained skeptical. Theories involving the mafia, the CIA, anti-Castro Cubans, and even elements within the U.S. government have persisted over the years. These theories have been the subject of books, documentaries, and public debate, but no definitive evidence has emerged to conclusively prove any of them. The assassination of John F. Kennedy had profound effects on the United States and the world. It cut short the promising presidency of a leader who had inspired hope and change. Kennedy's death created a sense of national tragedy and loss, and it ushered in a period of turmoil in the 1960s, marked by the civil rights movement, the escalation of the Vietnam War, and social upheaval. In the years since, Kennedy has been remembered as a charismatic and visionary leader, and his assassination has come to symbolize the loss of a hopeful era in American history. While the full truth about the events of that fateful day may never be known, the legacy of John F. Kennedy continues to resonate, shaping the course of American politics and inspiring future generations of leaders. The Arab Spring Uprisings. The Arab Spring Uprisings, which began in late 2010 and spread across the Arab world in 2011, were a series of pro-democracy protests, demonstrations, and revolutions that dramatically reshaped the political landscape of the Middle East and North Africa. The movement, fueled by widespread dissatisfaction with autocratic regimes, economic hardship, and a desire for greater political freedoms, brought millions of people to the streets demanding change. The spark that ignited the Arab Spring was the self-immolation of Mohamed Bouazizi, a 26-year-old Tunisian street vendor, on December 17, 2010. Bouazizi had been humiliated by a police officer who confiscated his cart and refused to address his grievances. In an act of despair, he set himself on fire in protest, an event that resonated deeply with many Tunisians who were frustrated by government corruption, unemployment, and police brutality. Bouazizi's death led to mass protests in Tunisia, which grew rapidly and called for the resignation of President Zine El Abidine Ben Ali, who had been in power for over 2 decades. The protests in Tunisia eventually forced Ben Ali to flee the country in January 2011, marking the first success of the Arab Spring. This victory inspired similar movements in other countries across the region. The ability of ordinary citizens to overthrow a long-standing authoritarian ruler energized activists and sparked hopes for widespread political change. Social media platforms such as Facebook and Twitter played a crucial role in organizing protests, spreading information, and mobilizing people across borders. The wave of unrest spread quickly to Egypt, where the population was also disillusioned with the government of President Hosni Mubarak, who had ruled the country for nearly 30 years. In January 2011, massive protests erupted in Cairo's Tahrir Square, calling for an end to Mubarak's regime. The protests grew in size and intensity over the following weeks, with demonstrators demanding democratic reforms, an end to corruption, and greater freedoms. On February 11th, Mubarak was forced to step down, and his resignation was seen as another victory for the movement. However, the outcomes of the Arab Spring were mixed, and the wave of uprisings led to varying results in different countries. In Tunisia, the revolution eventually resulted in the establishment of a more democratic political system, with free elections and a new constitution. Tunisia's success in navigating a peaceful transition to democracy made it one of the few positive examples of the Arab Spring. In Egypt, the fall of Mubarak led to a brief period of political change, but it was followed by instability. In 2012, Egypt held its first democratic elections, resulting in the election of Mohamed Morsi, a member of the Muslim Brotherhood. However, Morsi's presidency faced significant opposition, and his rule was marked by growing tensions between secular and Islamist factions. In 2013, Morsi was overthrown by a military coup led by General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, which led to the re-establishment of a military-backed regime that cracked down on opposition and curtailed civil liberties. In Libya, the protests escalated into a full-scale civil war, with NATO intervening to support the opposition against the regime of Colonel Muammar Gaddafi, who had ruled the country for over 40 years. Gaddafi was eventually captured and killed in October 2011, but Libya descended into a state of chaos and division, with rival militias and political factions vying for control. The country remains unstable to this day. In Syria, the uprising quickly turned into a brutal and prolonged civil war. Pro-democracy protests against President Bashar al-Assad's government were met with violent repression, leading to a devastating conflict that continues to this day, with millions of Syrians displaced and hundreds of thousands killed. While the Arab Spring initially offered hope for greater democracy and human rights in the Arab world, many of the uprisings resulted in significant political and social instability. In some cases, the overthrow of dictators led to new authoritarian regimes, while in others, civil wars and humanitarian crises ensued. The legacy of the Arab Spring is complex and contested, but its impact on the region and the world continues to be felt. The COVID-19 pandemic outbreak. The COVID-19 pandemic, caused by the novel coronavirus SARS-CoV-2, began in December 2019 and quickly escalated into one of the most significant global health crises in modern history. The virus emerged in Wuhan, China, where early cases were reported in December 2019, though it is believed to have been circulating before it was identified. The outbreak spread rapidly across China and to other countries, leading the World Health Organization, WHO, to declare a public health emergency of international concern on January 30, 2020. By March 11, 2020, COVID-19 was officially declared a pandemic, marking the beginning of a global health emergency. COVID-19 is primarily transmitted through respiratory droplets when an infected person coughs, sneezes, or talks. It can also spread by touching surfaces contaminated with the virus and then touching the face. The virus primarily affects the respiratory system, causing symptoms such as fever, cough, fatigue, shortness of breath, and loss of taste or smell. In severe cases, it can lead to pneumonia, acute respiratory distress syndrome, ARDS, and organ failure. Certain populations, such as the elderly and those with underlying health conditions, are at higher risk of developing severe complications or dying from the virus. The rapid spread of COVID-19 overwhelmed health systems worldwide, causing widespread disruptions in daily life and economies. As the virus spread, countries implemented various measures to slow its transmission. These measures included widespread lockdowns, travel restrictions, mask mandates, social distancing guidelines, and the closure of non-essential businesses and schools. Health authorities also emphasized hand hygiene and the importance of avoiding crowded spaces to limit the virus's spread. The pandemic had a profound impact on global economies. Many industries, particularly travel, hospitality, and entertainment, faced severe losses due to lockdowns and restrictions. Unemployment rates soared as businesses closed, and entire sectors of the economy were brought to a halt. Governments around the world responded with economic stimulus packages, unemployment benefits, and other financial aid to support individuals and businesses. However, the economic fallout was uneven, with low-income workers and vulnerable populations experiencing the most significant hardships. The COVID-19 pandemic also triggered a global race to develop a vaccine. Scientists and researchers worked at unprecedented speeds to develop and test vaccines that could prevent the spread of the virus and reduce the severity of the illness. By December 2020, the first vaccines, including those developed by Pfizer-BioNTech, Moderna, and AstraZeneca, were authorized for emergency use, and mass vaccination campaigns began in many countries. Vaccination efforts were hailed as a vital tool in bringing the pandemic under control, though vaccine distribution posed challenges, particularly in low-income countries. Alongside the development of vaccines, the pandemic exposed and exacerbated existing social, economic, and healthcare inequalities. Marginalized communities, including racial and ethnic minorities, were disproportionately affected by COVID-19, experiencing higher rates of infection, hospitalization, and death. Healthcare workers, who were on the front lines of the fight against the virus, faced significant physical and emotional stress, with many working long hours in overwhelmed hospitals and experiencing personal loss. The pandemic also led to significant changes in how people lived and worked. With lockdowns and social distancing, remote work, online learning, and virtual meetings became the norm for many people. The shift to digital platforms had lasting effects on the way society functions, accelerating trends in e-commerce, telemedicine, and digital communication. As the pandemic unfolded, the world saw an outpouring of solidarity, but also significant challenges in international cooperation. Countries raced to secure personal protective equipment, PPE, medical supplies, and vaccines, sometimes engaging in competition rather than collaboration. Global efforts to manage the crisis were hindered by political polarization, misinformation, and skepticism about the virus and vaccines. The COVID-19 pandemic is still ongoing in many parts of the world, with new variants of the virus emerging and continuing to spread. While vaccines have played a crucial role in reducing the severity of illness and death, the pandemic has had lasting effects on public health, economies, and society. It underscored the importance of global cooperation, scientific innovation, and public health infrastructure in addressing health crises. The lessons learned from the COVID-19 pandemic will likely shape how the world responds to future global health emergencies.